When Eliza Harper stepped off that train 1234, she was a young woman with a baby in her arms. She was a survivor of the Great War, and she was on her way to a new life. She was a new mother, and she was a new wife. She was a new woman, and she was a new person. She was a new person, and she was a new person. She was a new person, and she was a new person. She was a new person, and she was a new person. She was a new person, and she was a new person. She was a new person, and she was a new person. She was a new person, and she was a new person. She was a new person, and she was a new person. She was a new person, and she was a new person. She was a new person, and she was a new person. She was a new person, and she was a new person. She was a new person, and she was a new person. She was a new person, and she was a new person. She was a new person, and she was a new person. She was a new person, and she was a new person. She was a new person, and she was a new person. She was a new person, and she was a new person. She was a new person, and she was a new person. She was a new person, and she was a new person. She was a new person, and she was a new person. She was a new person, and she was a new person. She was a new person, and she was a new person. She was a new person, and she was a new person. She was a new person, and she was a new person. She was a new person, and she was a new person. She was a new person, and she was a new person. She was a new person, and she was a new person. She was a new person, and she was a new person. She was a new person, and she was a new person. She was a new person, and she was a new person. She was a new person, and she was a new person. She was a new person, and she was a new person. She was a new person, and she was a new person. She was a new person, and she was a new person. She was a new person, and she was a new person. She was a new person, and she was a new person. She was a new person, and she was a new person. She was a new person, and she was a new person. She was a new person, and she was a new person. She was a new person, and she was a new person. She was a new person, and she was a new person. She was a new person. And when Eliza Harper stepped off that train 3 months ago, she was just another unwanted bride sent west to die quietly beside a man who'd never love her. But tonight, with revenge closing in and fire consuming everything they'd built, this woman no one thought beautiful enough to keep became the only thing standing between Rowan and a bullet with his name carved into it. Stay with us until the end of this story. Hit that like button and comment, what city? The snow fell like judgment over Ironwood Ridge. It had been falling for 3 days straight, the kind of relentless Montana winter that buried fence posts and froze cattle where they stood. Inside the main house, Margaret Hale sat in her rocking chair by the fire, the letter trembling in her weathered hands. She'd read it 4 times already, but the words hadn't changed. Mrs. Hale, I regret to inform you that the condition we discussed has progressed more rapidly than anticipated. I give you 6 months, perhaps 8 if you're fortunate. I'm sorry, there's nothing more to be done. Dr. Pemberton's handwriting was neat, clinical. He'd delivered the death sentence with the same detached professionalism he used to set broken bones and lance boils. 6 months. Maybe 8. Margaret folded the letter carefully and tucked it into her apron pocket. Through the frosted window, she could see her son crossing the yard toward the barn, his broad shoulders hunched against the wind. Even from this distance, she could see the weight he carried, not just in his scarred hands or the slight limp from that old bullet wound, but in the rigid set of his jaw, the mechanical precision of his movements. Rowan Hale was 34 years old and already half dead inside. She knew why. They all knew why. The entire territory knew the story of Samuel Hale, murdered 5 years ago by Jack Rourke over a card game gone wrong. They knew how Rowan had tracked Rourke for 6 months through territories both civilized and wild, how he'd finally caught up with him in a mining camp outside Helena. They knew Rowan had come back alone, his knuckles split and bloody, and never spoke his brother's name again. But Margaret was the only one who knew what it had cost him. She was the only one who saw how her son moved through his days like a ghost, speaking only when necessary, touching no one, allowing no one close. He ran the ranch with brutal efficiency. He paid his men fairly. He kept the books balanced and the cattle fed, and he was slowly turning to stone. I won't leave you alone, Margaret whispered to the empty room. I won't let you bury yourself with me. She rose from her chair, joints protesting, and crossed to the mahogany desk that had belonged to her husband. From the bottom drawer, she withdrew a stack of letters, responses to the advertisement she'd placed 6 weeks ago in the Boston Daily Advertiser. She'd told no one, not even Rowan. She'd simply written what was true. Widowed rancher seeks practical wife. Montana territory, must be hardy, honest, and willing to work. Beauty not required. Character essential. The responses had surprised her. 43 letters from women desperate enough or brave enough to trade everything they knew for a chance at something different. She'd read them all carefully, sorting them into piles based on instinct more than logic. Most were from women too young, too fragile, too obviously running from scandal rather than toward opportunity. But one letter had stopped her cold. My name is Eliza Harper. I am 26 years old, unmarried, and possess no remarkable beauty or accomplishments that would recommend me to a man of means. What I do possess is a strong back, a clear mind, and a willingness to work harder than anyone you've ever met. I can read, write, and cipher. I can cook, clean, mend, and manage accounts. I don't faint at the sight of blood, and I don't expect love where none is promised. If you need someone reliable more than you need someone pretty, I am your woman. Margaret had written back that same day. The correspondence that followed had been brief and businesslike. Eliza Harper asked practical questions about the ranch, the weather, the expectations. She never once inquired about Rowan himself, not his age, his appearance, his temperament. She asked only whether the work would be fair and whether she would be treated with basic dignity. 3 weeks ago, Margaret had sent the train fare and a wedding date. Tomorrow, Eliza Harper would arrive in Ironwood. The front door crashed open, bringing with it a gust of snow and frigid air. Rowan stamped his boots on the mat, removing his hat to shake the accumulated snow from the brim. He was a big man, 6'3", built like the mountains that surrounded their valley, solid, immovable, weathered by storms. His dark hair was shot through with premature gray at the temples, and a scar ran from his left eyebrow down to his cheekbone, a memento from a range war 10 years past. North fence is down, he said without preamble. Gideon's taking a crew out at first light to repair it. Lost 2 head to the cold already. I'll make extra food for the men, Margaret said. Rowan crossed to the fire, holding his hands toward the heat. His gray eyes, the same shade as a winter sky, fixed on his mother with that unnerving intensity he'd developed since Samuel's death. He saw too much and said too little. You've been crying, he said flatly. I'm old. Old women cry at anything. You're not crying now. You're scheming. I know that look. Margaret smoothed her apron, buying herself time. She'd planned to tell him tonight anyway. There was no sense delaying it. Rowan, sit down. We need to talk. He didn't sit. He never sat when he sensed trouble coming. He just stood there, solid as an oak, waiting for the axe to fall. I've arranged for you to be married, Margaret said. The bride arrives on tomorrow's train. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the fire seemed to hold its breath. No, Rowan said finally, just that single word, flat and final as a door slamming shut. I'm dying, Margaret said, and watched her son's face turn to carved granite. Dr. Pemberton gives me 6 months, maybe 8. I won't leave you alone out here, Rowan. I won't let this ranch consume you completely after I'm gone. Then don't die. His voice was rough, scraped raw. Fight it. We'll get another doctor, a specialist from Chicago. I'm 67 years old with a cancer eating through my insides. There is no fight left to win. She moved toward him, placing one weathered hand on his arm. He didn't pull away, but he didn't lean into the touch either. You need someone, son. Someone to help run this place. Someone to pull you back when the darkness gets too deep. I don't need anyone. The words came out like broken glass. I'm fine. You're not fine. You haven't been fine since Samuel died. You're so busy surviving that you've forgotten how to live. Margaret tightened her grip on his arm. This woman, Eliza Harper, she's practical, honest. She doesn't expect love or romance. She just wants work and a roof over her head. You don't have to love her, Rowan. You just have to let her help. Rowan pulled away, moving to the window. Outside, the snow continued its relentless assault on the frozen earth. When he spoke again, his voice was carefully controlled, empty of emotion. You had no right. I had every right. I'm your mother, and I love you, and I won't apologize for trying to save you from yourself. What if I refuse? Then I'll die knowing my son chose to spend the rest of his life as half a man, buried alive in guilt and grief. Is that what Samuel would have wanted for you? The muscle in Rowan's jaw clenched. Margaret knew she'd struck deep, using his brother's name like a weapon, but she was running out of time for gentle persuasion. She arrives at 2:00, Margaret continued. The wedding is set for Friday. Pastor Williams has already agreed. All you have to do is show up and say, "I do." After that, you can ignore her completely if you want. But give her a chance, Rowan. Please. Rowan didn't answer. He just stood at the window, a statue carved from ice and sorrow, watching the snow bury everything clean. Eliza Harper had been traveling for 6 days. 6 days of coal smoke and cramped seats, of stale bread and lukewarm coffee, of watching America roll past in an endless scroll of farmland and forest, plains and mountains. 6 days to question every decision that had led her to this moment, sitting in a third-class car bound for a Montana Territory town she'd never heard of, traveling to marry a man she'd never met. She pressed her forehead against the cold window glass, watching the snow-covered landscape race past. This far north, winter held the land in an iron grip. Trees stood like skeletal sentinels, their bare branches clawing at a gray sky. Mountains loomed in the distance, massive and indifferent, beautiful, brutal, honest in its harshness. So different from Boston. Eliza closed her eyes, letting the rhythm of the rails carry her thoughts backward. Boston. The city that had chewed her up and spit her out without ceremony or apology. She'd been born there, raised there, had expected to die there eventually, probably alone in some drafty boarding house, wearing herself thin over someone else's laundry. She'd learned early that the world had no use for plain girls without money or connections. Her parents had died when she was 15, her father to consumption, her mother to heartbreak 6 months later. The small inheritance they'd left had evaporated quickly, eaten up by rent and food and the simple cost of existing. For 11 years, Eliza had worked. She'd worked as a seamstress until the factory closed. She'd worked as a housemaid until the family moved to Philadelphia. She'd worked in a laundry, a bookshop, a boarding house kitchen. She'd worked until her hands were raw and her back ached, and she'd saved almost nothing because the cost of survival always exceeded her meager wages. And through it all, she'd remained invisible. Plain Eliza. Competent Eliza. Reliable, forgettable Eliza Harper, the girl men looked through rather than at. She'd watched prettier girls marry shopkeepers and clerks, watched them trade their youth and beauty for security and children. She'd attended their weddings with forced smiles and genuine good wishes, then returned to her rented room alone. By 26, she'd accepted her fate. Spinsterhood. A lifetime of other people's laundry, other people's children, other people's lives. She'd made her peace with it. And then she'd seen Margaret Hale's advertisement. Beauty not required, character essential. Those 5 words had struck her like lightning. Not beautiful, but honest. Not ornamental, but useful. For the first time in her life, someone wanted exactly what she had to offer. Not despite her plainness, but indifferent to it. She'd written that night, half convinced she'd never receive a reply. When Margaret's letter arrived 3 weeks later, Eliza had read it 7 times before allowing herself to believe it was real. Real. A real chance. A real future. She opened her eyes as the train whistle screamed, announcing their approach to Ironwood Station. Her stomach clenched with a fear she refused to acknowledge. She'd come too far to retreat now. She'd sold everything she owned, bought a one-way ticket, and burned every bridge behind her. Forward was the only direction left. The train shuddered to a halt, brakes squealing. Eliza stood, smoothing her plain brown traveling dress, and reached for her carpet bag from the overhead rack. Everything she owned in the world fit into that single bag. 2 dresses, undergarments, a spare pair of boots, her mother's Bible, and a book of household accounts, not much to show for 26 years of living. The other passengers, miners and merchants, families and drifters, pushed past her toward the exit. Eliza waited until the crowd thinned before stepping down onto the platform. The cold hit her like a physical blow, stealing her breath. Boston had been cold, but this was different. This cold had teeth. The platform was nearly empty. A few people clustered near the station house, collars turned up against the wind. Eliza scanned their faces, looking for someone who might be looking for her. And then she saw him. He stood apart from the others, a dark figure against the white landscape. Tall, broad-shouldered, utterly still. Even from 30 feet away, she could feel the weight of his gaze, cool, assessing, measuring her against some internal standard she was certain she'd fail. Rowan Hale. Had to be. Eliza lifted her chin and walked toward him, each step crunching in the packed snow. As she drew closer, she could make out more details. The scar on his face, the premature gray in his dark hair, the set of his mouth, neither welcoming nor hostile, just closed. A door locked against intrusion. She stopped 3 feet away and met his eyes. Gray, cold as winter steel. "Mr. Hale?" Her voice came out steady. Small miracle. "Miss Harper?" He didn't offer his hand. "My mother sent me to collect you. Not welcome you, not meet you. Collect you. Like a package. Like cargo." "I appreciate you making the trip into town," Eliza said carefully. He gestured toward a wagon waiting near the station house. "We should go, storm's coming in." He didn't offer to take her bag. He just turned and walked toward the wagon, expecting her to follow. Eliza tightened her grip on the carpet bag and trailed after him, her second-hand boots slipping slightly on the icy ground. The wagon was sturdy but plain, the kind built for work rather than comfort. 2 thick-chested horses stood in the traces, their breath pluming white in the frigid air. Rowan swung up onto the seat with easy grace, then looked down at her with something that might have been impatience. Eliza climbed up beside him without assistance, settling her bag between her feet. The seat was narrow. Their shoulders nearly touched. Rowan released the brake and clicked his tongue. The horses leaned into their harnesses, and the wagon lurched forward. They rode in silence. Ironwood was small, a single main street lined with false-fronted buildings that looked like stage sets waiting to be struck. Mercantile, saloon, land office, feed store, a church with a modest steeple, a few dozen houses scattered behind the commercial buildings, smoke rising from their chimneys in thin gray columns. Civilization, barely. As they left the town behind, the landscape opened up into rolling white hills punctuated by dark clusters of evergreens. The road, more of a track really, climbed steadily into the mountains. The wind picked up, driving snow into their faces. "How far?" Eliza asked, breaking the silence. 8 miles. 8 miles. 2 words. That was all she was worth, apparently. Fine. She hadn't come here expecting conversation. She'd come here for work and shelter, and she'd get both regardless of whether this man ever spoke another word to her. They climbed higher. The trees closed in on either side, creating a tunnel of snow-laden branches. The temperature dropped noticeably. Eliza pulled her thin coat tighter, trying not to shiver. She'd bought the warmest coat she could afford in Boston, but it was clearly inadequate for Montana Territory winters. "You'll freeze to death in that," Rowan said suddenly. Eliza glanced at him. He was staring straight ahead, his face unreadable. "It's what I have," she said simply. "My mother has extras. She'll fit you out with something warmer." That's kind of her. Another mile passed in silence. Then Rowan spoke again, his voice carefully neutral. "She told you she's dying." It wasn't a question, but Eliza answered anyway. "Yes, she was honest about her condition in her letters." "And you came anyway." "Yes." "Why?" Eliza considered the question. She could offer platitudes about adventure or fresh starts. She could lie and say she'd always dreamed of the West. But Margaret Hale had requested honesty, and her son deserved the same. "Because in Boston, I was invisible," Eliza said. "I worked hard, saved what I could, but I was always one missed paycheck away from the streets. At 26, I'm too old to be a young bride and too young to give up completely. Your mother offered me something I've never had, a place that needs me. Not just for what I can do, but because there's a hole that needs filling. That's worth more than beauty or romance." Rowan was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough. "There won't be romance. I want that clear from the start. I didn't come here expecting it. I can provide shelter, food, safety, a share in the ranch if things work out, but don't expect warmth, don't expect love. I'm not capable of either anymore." Eliza turned to look at him fully. His profile was hard, carved from the same unyielding stone as the mountains around them. But beneath the hardness, she glimpsed something else, a wound so deep it had become part of his foundation. "What happened to you?" she asked softly. None of your concern. If we're to be married, I think it is my concern. His hands tightened on the reins. My brother was murdered 5 years ago. I killed the man responsible. That's all you need to know. The flatness in his voice was somehow worse than anger would have been. Eliza felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. I'm sorry for your loss, she said. Don't be. It's ancient history. But it wasn't. She could hear it in every word he didn't say, see it in the rigid set of his shoulders. Samuel Hale might be 5 years dead, but his ghost rode in this wagon beside them, as present as the falling snow. They crested a ridge, and the valley opened up before them. Even through the veil of snow, Eliza could see it, Ironwood Ridge Ranch, spreading across the valley floor like a small kingdom. The main house sat at the center, 2 stories of weathered timber with smoke rising from twin chimneys. Surrounding it were barns, corrals, outbuildings, all dusted white with snow. Cattle clustered near the hay cribs, dark shapes against the white landscape. It was bigger than she'd imagined, more established, more real. It's beautiful, Eliza said. Rowan grunted. It's work. Nothing beautiful about it. They descended into the valley, following a track that had been cut through the snow by previous wagon traffic. As they approached the main house, the front door opened and a figure emerged, a small woman wrapped in shawls, waving. Margaret Hale. Rowan pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the house and climbed down. This time, he did offer his hand to help Eliza descend. His grip was strong, calloused, and impersonal. He released her the moment her feet touched the ground. You must be frozen solid! Margaret rushed forward, pulling Eliza into an embrace that was chattering about the journey, and the cold chattering about the journey, and the cold, and the extra quilts she'd prepared. Eliza let herself be pulled along, grateful for the warmth, both from the fire and from Margaret's welcome. The interior of the house was simple but well kept. Wide plank floors, solid furniture, everything clean and orderly. A large stone fireplace dominated one wall of the main room, with a fire crackling cheerfully. The smell of baking bread filled the air. I've prepared the room next to Rowan's for you, Margaret said, already steering Eliza toward the stairs. After the wedding, you can decide. Well, we'll address that then. For now, you have your own space. Come, let me show you. Eliza glanced back as Margaret pulled her upstairs. Rowan stood in the doorway, her carpet bag in his hand, watching them with those cold gray eyes. Their gazes met for a moment. He looked away first. The room Margaret showed Eliza was small but clean, with a single window overlooking the valley. A narrow bed with a thick quilt. A washstand with a ceramic basin and pitcher, a wardrobe that smelled faintly of cedar. A braided rag rug on the wooden floor. It's not fancy, Margaret said, but it's warm and dry. The washwater will be cold this time of year, but there's hot water downstairs if you need it. Rowan built the pump house 2 years ago. We have water indoors now, which is a blessing in winter. Eliza set her carpet bag on the bed and turned to face the older woman. In the lamplight, she could see what the dimness of the wagon ride had hidden. Margaret Hale was sick. Truly sick. Her skin had the thin, papery quality of advanced illness, and dark circles shadowed her eyes. But her smile was warm and genuine. Thank you, Eliza said, for everything. The room, the chance, all of it. Margaret waved a hand dismissively. Thank me by making my stubborn son smile at least once before I'm gone. That'll be payment enough. She crossed to the wardrobe and opened it, revealing several thick wool coats and shawls. These were mine when I was younger and had more meat on my bones. They should fit you well enough. Take whatever you need. Montana winters don't forgive thin coats and foolish pride. Eliza ran her hand over the nearest coat, heavy wool, well-made, warm. I can't just take. Yes, you can. Consider it part of your trousseau. Margaret's smile turned mischievous. Not that you'll get much else in the way of wedding finery. We're practical folk out here. Practical suits me fine. I thought it might. Margaret moved to the window, looking out at the snow-covered valley. Rowan was difficult on the ride from town, I imagine. Eliza considered lying but dismissed it. He was honest. I appreciated that. Honest? That's a kind word for it. Margaret sighed. He wasn't always like this. Before Samuel died, Rowan laughed. He joked with the hands. He'd ride into town on Saturday nights and dance with every girl at the social. He was alive. What happened? Eliza asked. I know his brother was killed, but... Margaret was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was heavy with old grief. Samuel was the youngest, 22 years old, handsome as sin, and wild as the wind. He had a gift for cards and a weakness for whiskey. One night in Helena, he sat down to play poker with a man named Jack Rourke. By dawn, Samuel had won $300 and Rourke's horse. Rourke accused him of cheating. Eliza waited, sensing there was more. There was a fight. Rourke pulled a knife. Samuel pulled a gun, but Rourke was faster. Margaret's voice cracked. They left him in the street like trash. Rowan found out 3 days later when the sheriff rode out to deliver the news. By the time Rowan got to Helena, Rourke had vanished into the territories. But Rowan found him. 6 months later, tracked him all the way to a mining camp outside Helena. What happened there? Rowan never said. But he came home alone with blood on his hands and something broken inside him. He hasn't been the same since. Eliza absorbed this in silence. 5 years of carrying that weight. 5 years of guilt and grief and rage with nowhere to put it except deep inside where it could fester and rot. No wonder he was made of ice. He blames himself, Eliza said softly. Of course he does. Samuel was his responsibility, and he failed to protect him. Never mind that Samuel was a grown man making his own foolish choices. Never mind that Rowan was 200 miles away when it happened. In Rowan's mind, he should have known, should have stopped it, should have done something. Margaret turned from the window, her eyes bright with unshed tears. I'm running out of time to pull him back from that edge, Eliza. That's why I need you. Not just to run this ranch or warm his bed, though those things matter too. I need you to remind him that life still exists, that tomorrow is worth seeing. I don't know if I can do that, Eliza said honestly. I'm not exactly skilled at warming hearts. Maybe not, but you're honest and you're steady, and right now that's what he needs more than anything else. Someone who won't shatter or run when he turns cold. Someone who'll just stay. Staying. Yes, Eliza knew how to do that. She'd stayed through hunger and loneliness and invisibility in Boston. She could stay through a cold husband's silence in Montana. I'll do my best, Eliza said. That's all I ask. Margaret squeezed her hand. Now come downstairs. Supper won't make itself, and you must be starving after that journey. The kitchen was warm and filled with the smell of roasting meat. Margaret directed Eliza to set the table while she checked the oven. The simple domesticity of it, the clink of plates, the scrape of chairs, the comfortable silence, felt oddly soothing after 6 days of travel. Rowan entered as they were laying out the food. He'd changed from his outdoor clothes into clean trousers and a plain shirt. His hair was damp, as though he'd washed at the pump. He sat at the head of the table without comment, waiting. They ate in near silence. The food was simple but good: roast beef, potatoes, carrots, fresh bread with butter. Eliza hadn't realized how hungry she was until the first bite hit her tongue. She forced herself to eat slowly, maintaining some semblance of manners. Gideon Pike will be by tomorrow morning, Rowan said, addressing his mother. He wants to discuss the spring calving plans. Gideon's the foreman, Margaret explained to Eliza. Good man. Been with us 15 years. You'll like him. Eliza nodded, filing the information away. The wedding is set for Friday, Margaret continued. Pastor Williams will come out to the house. Just a simple ceremony. I've invited the hands to witness, and a few neighbors. Rowan's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. He just continued eating mechanically, as though fueling his body was a chore to be completed rather than a pleasure to be enjoyed. Do you have any questions about the ranch, Eliza? Margaret asked. About your duties or expectations? I can read and cipher, Eliza said. If you need help with accounts or correspondence, I'm capable. I'm also a competent cook and I can mend. I'm strongest with organization, inventory, supplies, managing household expenditures. The accounts are a mess, Margaret admitted. I've been too tired to keep up with them properly. If you could take those over, it would be a tremendous help. I'd be glad to. Rowan glanced up, his gray eyes fixing on Eliza with that unsettling intensity. You'll have full access to the ranch finances. My mother trusts you, so I'll trust you. But understand, this ranch is my life's work. If you steal from me or mismanage what I've built, there will be consequences. It wasn't a threat exactly, but it wasn't not a threat either. I wouldn't dream of it, Eliza said evenly. I'm here to help build, not tear down. He held her gaze a moment longer, then nodded once and returned to his meal. After supper, Margaret showed Eliza the small office off the main room where the ranch accounts were kept. Ledgers lined one wall, 3 years' worth of careful record-keeping gradually devolving into sporadic entries and obvious gaps. I used to be so good at this, Margaret said sadly, running her hand over the most recent ledger. But the past 6 months, I can't focus anymore. The numbers swim together. Eliza opened the current ledger, scanning the entries. Income from cattle sales, expenses for feed, equipment, wages. It was straightforward enough, but the recent entries were incomplete. Half-finished calculations, notes to herself that trailed off mid-thought. I can work with this, Eliza said. It'll take me a few days to get everything current and organized, but it's manageable. Bless you, child. Margaret sagged with visible relief. That's one less thing to worry about. They returned to the main room where Rowan sat by the fire, reading a week-old newspaper. He didn't look up when they entered. I'm exhausted, Margaret announced. I'm going to bed. Eliza, feel free to sit by the fire if you'd like. Rowan can show you where the lamps and firewood are kept. I'm tired too, Eliza said quickly. I think I'll retire as well. She wasn't tired. She was giving Rowan space, giving him permission to not make conversation with the stranger who'd invaded his home. Good night, then. Margaret kissed Eliza's cheek, a gesture so motherly it made Eliza's throat tighten, and headed upstairs. Eliza followed, acutely aware of Rowan's presence behind her. At the top of the stairs, she paused. Good night, Mr. Hale. Rowan, he said without looking up from his newspaper. If we're to be married, you should use my given name. Rowan, then. Good night. He didn't respond. Eliza closed the door of her small room behind her and leaned against it, releasing a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Through the thin wall, she could hear Margaret moving around in the adjacent room, the creak of bed springs as the older woman settled in for the night. Eliza changed into her nightgown, plain cotton, worn soft from years of washing, and climbed into bed. The quilt was heavy and warm, and the mattress, though thin, was far more comfortable than the train seats she'd endured for the past week. She should have been exhausted. Instead, she lay awake, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the house settling around her, wind rattling the windows, the distant lowing of cattle, footsteps downstairs as Rowan banked the fire and locked the doors. In 3 days, she would marry a man who looked at her with cold eyes and spoke in clipped sentences, a man who'd made it clear he could offer her shelter and safety, but nothing resembling affection. She'd agreed to this. She'd chosen this. And despite everything, the cold reception, the stark reality of the situation, the brutal honesty of it all, Eliza didn't regret it, because here, at least, she had a purpose. Here, she was needed. That would have to be enough. Morning came early on a working ranch. Eliza woke to the sound of boots on wooden floors and the smell of coffee brewing. She dressed quickly in the dim pre-dawn light, braiding her hair with practiced efficiency. Her own clothes seemed shabby in this place, but they would have to do until she could make something new. Downstairs, she found Margaret already in the kitchen, moving slowly but purposefully as she prepared breakfast. You should have woken me, Eliza said, immediately moving to help. I'm here to work, not be waited on. Old habits, Margaret said, but she stepped aside gratefully, letting Eliza take over the bacon that was beginning to smoke in the pan. They worked together in comfortable silence, falling into an easy rhythm. Eliza scrambled eggs while Margaret sliced bread. They'd just finished setting the table when Rowan came in from the barn, bringing with him the smell of hay and horses and cold morning air. He hung his coat by the door and washed at the basin, scrubbing his hands thoroughly before sitting down to eat. A man used to hard work and simple routines. Gideon will be here within the hour, he said, loading his plate with eggs and bacon. I'll be out most of the day checking the herd. We're moving them to the south pasture where the wind breaks better. I'll have supper ready at 6, Margaret said. Rowan nodded, already halfway through his meal. He ate like a man with better things to do, efficient and joyless. After he left, Eliza cleaned the kitchen while Margaret rested in her chair by the fire. The work felt good, purposeful, productive. She scrubbed the cast iron pans until they gleamed, reorganized the pantry, took inventory of the dry goods. "You don't have to do all that today," Margaret called from the other room. "Pace yourself." "I like to know where things are," Eliza called back. "Besides, it helps me learn the household." Mid-morning, a knock at the door announced Gideon Pike's arrival. Eliza answered it to find a weather-beaten man in his 50s, holding his hat respectfully in his work-roughened hands. "Ma'am," he said, nodding politely. "Gideon Pike. I'm here to see Mr. Hale." "He's in the south pasture," Eliza said. "But please, come in. Can I offer you coffee?" "That's kind, but I'll head out to find him. Just wanted to pay my respects first." He shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable with formal introductions. "Welcome to Ironwood Ridge, ma'am. We're glad to have you." "Thank you, Mr. Pike." "Just Gideon, ma'am. We don't stand much on ceremony out here." After he left, Eliza returned to her exploration of the house. She found the linen closet, the root cellar, the small sewing room where Margaret's neglected mending basket sat overflowing with work. She made mental notes of everything that needed attention, everything that could be improved or organized or repaired. In the office, she settled in with the account books, working methodically through the past 6 months of incomplete entries. It took her most of the afternoon, but by the time the light began to fail, she'd reconciled the accounts, identified the gaps, and drafted a list of questions about expenditures that weren't clear. Margaret found her there as the sun set, surrounded by ledgers and papers. "You've been at this for hours," the older woman said. "Come take a break. Your eyes will cross." Eliza rubbed her temples, realizing they'd begun to ache. "Just another few minutes. I'm almost finished with October's accounts." "Finish tomorrow. Tonight, let's talk about more pleasant things." Margaret settled into the chair across the desk. "Tell me about Boston. What was your life like there?" Eliza hesitated, then decided honesty was still the best policy. "Lonely. I worked a lot, saved what I could, existed more than lived. No family. My parents died when I was 15, no siblings, no aunts or uncles that I knew of." Eliza closed the ledger carefully. "I was alone. I got used to it. And now you're here, about to marry a stranger." Margaret's expression was gentle, understanding. "That takes courage. Or desperation. Perhaps both." Margaret smiled. "Either way, I'm glad you came. I think you might be exactly what this place needs, what Rowan needs, even if he doesn't know it yet." That evening, Rowan returned just as Eliza was setting supper on the table. He looked exhausted, his face raw from the cold, his movements stiff with fatigue. But he washed up and sat down without complaint, eating the stew Eliza had prepared with the same mechanical efficiency as always. "The accounts are current through October," Eliza reported. "I have some questions about a few expenditures, but I can discuss those with you when you have time." Rowan glanced up, a flicker of something, surprise, respect, crossing his face before it smoothed back into neutrality. "Tomorrow. After breakfast, if you're free." "I'm free." And so it began. The careful dance of their pre-marriage days. Rowan maintained his distance, speaking to Eliza only when necessary, treating her with cool courtesy, but nothing resembling warmth. Yet slowly, in tiny increments, he began to trust her competence. She proved herself in small ways. She reorganized the pantry, saving space and reducing waste. She mended the ranch hands' work shirts, extending the life of expensive fabric. She took over the accounts completely, catching errors that had been bleeding money for months. She asked intelligent questions about the ranch operations and listened carefully to the answers. And most importantly, she didn't demand anything from Rowan. She didn't expect smiles or conversation or gratitude. She just worked, steady and uncomplaining, making herself useful without making herself a burden. By Thursday evening, the night before the wedding, Margaret pulled Eliza aside after supper. "I have something for you," the older woman said, leading Eliza upstairs to her own room. From a trunk at the foot of her bed, she withdrew a dress. Simple but beautiful, made of deep blue wool with modest lace at the collar and cuffs. "This was my wedding dress," Margaret said softly. "I know it's not fancy, but I thought, if you wanted—" Eliza touched the fabric reverently. It was the nicest dress she'd ever seen, let alone worn. "I couldn't. It's too precious. I want you to have it. I wore it when I married Rowan's father, right here in this house. It's been waiting in this trunk for 38 years for someone to wear it again. Margaret pressed the dress into Eliza's hands. Please, let me do this one thing for you. Thank you, Eliza whispered, her throat tight. I'll treasure it. That night, lying in her narrow bed with the blue dress hanging from the wardrobe door, Eliza allowed herself to feel the full weight of what tomorrow would bring. She would become Eliza Hale, wife to a man who didn't want her, daughter to a woman who was dying, mistress of a ranch that felt more real than anything she'd ever known. She should have been terrified. Instead, she felt something strange and unfamiliar blooming in her chest. Hope. Friday dawned clear and brutally cold. Eliza woke before sunrise, too nervous to sleep. She lay in bed listening to the house wake around her, Margaret's soft footsteps, the clatter of cookware, Rowan's heavy tread as he headed to the barn for morning chores. Her wedding day. She rose and washed in the icy water from the pitcher, taking care with her appearance in a way she rarely did. She brushed her hair until it shone, then braided it carefully before pinning it up in a simple but neat style. She put on her best undergarments, then carefully lifted the blue dress from its hanger. It fit perfectly, as though Margaret had known exactly her measurements. The wool was soft and warm, the color bringing out the faint blue in Eliza's gray eyes. She looked at herself in the small mirror above the washstand. Not beautiful, never beautiful, but clean and neat and respectable. It would have to do. Downstairs, the house was in controlled chaos. Margaret directed 2 ranch hands who were moving furniture to create space in the main room. The good china was being laid out on the table. Someone had brought in pine branches to decorate the mantel, filling the house with the sharp, clean scent of evergreen. "Oh, Eliza," Margaret breathed when she saw her. "You look lovely." "The dress is beautiful. Thank you again." "It suits you better than it ever suited me." Margaret squeezed her hands. "Are you nervous?" "Terrified," Eliza admitted. "That's normal. I was sick to my stomach before my wedding. Of course, I was 18 and convinced I was about to make the worst mistake of my life." Margaret smiled at the memory. "Turned out to be the best decision I ever made. Thomas Hale was a good man." Was he nervous when you told him about the wedding?" Margaret's smile turned sad. "He's been dead inside for 5 years, child. I don't think he's capable of being nervous anymore. But don't mistake his ice for cruelty. He's just lost, and he doesn't know how to find his way back." "Mrs. Hale, Margaret, please, we're going to be family." "Margaret." Eliza took a breath. "I need you to know I don't expect to fix him. I'm not some magical cure for grief. I'm just practical, steady. That's all I can offer." "That's more than you think," Margaret said firmly. "Now, come help me finish these preparations before Pastor Williams arrives." The next 2 hours passed in a blur of activity. Neighbors began arriving, ranchers and their wives bundled against the cold, bringing food and good wishes. The ranch hands cleaned up and assembled in the main room, uncomfortable in their Sunday best. Gideon Pike stood near the fire, clearly assigned to keep things orderly, and through it all, Rowan was conspicuously absent. "He's in the barn," Gideon said quietly when Eliza asked. "Said he needed to check on one of the horses. Hiding, more like. But Eliza couldn't blame him. If she'd had a barn to hide in, she might have done the same." Pastor Williams arrived at 2 o'clock sharp, a thin, earnest man with kind eyes and a worn Bible. He spoke briefly with Margaret, then asked to see Rowan. "I'll get him," Gideon said, heading out into the cold. Eliza waited in the small sewing room, away from the guests, trying to calm her racing heart. This was it. No turning back now. In a few minutes, she would be married to a stranger, bound to him by law and vow, for better or worse. "Eliza?" Margaret appeared in the doorway. "It's time." Eliza stood, smoothing the blue dress one last time. "I'm ready." The main room had been transformed. Chairs were arranged in neat rows, filled with weathered faces and curious eyes. Someone had lit candles on the mantel. Pastor Williams stood before the fireplace, his Bible open, and beside him, rigid as carved granite, stood Rowan Hale. He'd cleaned up, put on his Sunday suit, black and severe, making him look like a man attending a funeral rather than his own wedding. His gray eyes found Eliza as she entered, and for a moment something flickered across his face. Not happiness, not even acceptance, just acknowledgement. She was here. This was happening. Margaret took Eliza's arm and led her to stand beside Rowan. The height difference was pronounced. He towered over her by nearly a foot. Eliza had to tilt her head back to see his face. "Dearly beloved," Pastor Williams began, his voice carrying easily through the quiet room, "we are gathered here today to witness the union of Rowan Hale and Eliza Harper in holy matrimony." The words washed over Eliza like water. She heard them without processing them, too focused on the man beside her. He stood perfectly still, his face expressionless, his hands loose at his sides. He didn't look at her. He didn't look at anyone. He just stared straight ahead, enduring. "Rowan Hale, do you take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" A pause. A long, terrible pause. Then, "I do." The words were quiet but firm. A commitment made without joy but with absolute certainty. "Eliza Harper, do you take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" Eliza looked up at the hard, scarred face of the man who would be her husband. He was still staring straight ahead, his jaw clenched, every line of his body screaming reluctance. But he'd said yes. He'd committed. And she would do the same. "I do." "The rings, please." Gideon stepped forward with 2 simple gold bands. Margaret must have arranged them, because Rowan looked genuinely surprised when the foreman pressed one into his palm. "Place the ring on her finger and repeat after me," Pastor Williams instructed. Rowan turned to face Eliza fully for the first time. His hand was warm and calloused when he took hers. He slid the ring onto her finger with surprising gentleness, his gray eyes finally meeting hers. "With this ring, I thee wed," he repeated, his voice low and rough. Eliza took the second ring, larger, heavier, and reached for Rowan's hand. His fingers were scarred, the knuckles enlarged from years of hard work. She slid the ring into place, feeling the weight of the moment settle over her like snow. "With this ring, I thee wed. By the power vested in me by the territory of Montana, I now pronounce you husband and wife." Pastor Williams smiled. "You may kiss your bride." Rowan's jaw tightened. For a moment, Eliza thought he might refuse. But then he bent down, and his lips brushed hers in the briefest, most impersonal contact imaginable, a technical requirement fulfilled without a hint of tenderness. When he pulled back, his expression was closed again. Sealed. "Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you Mr. and Mrs. Rowan Hale." Scattered applause. Congratulations from the assembled guests. Margaret was crying quietly, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. The ranch hands shuffled forward to shake Rowan's hand and nod respectfully at Eliza. It was done. She was married. The rest of the evening passed in a haze. Food was served. Margaret and the neighbors had prepared a feast. There was even a small cake, which Rowan cut with mechanical precision. People talked and laughed, celebrating a union that felt more like a business arrangement than a marriage. Through it all, Rowan remained at Eliza's side, fulfilling his duties as husband with grim determination. He introduced her to neighbors, accepted their congratulations, ensured she had food and drink. But he didn't smile. He didn't relax. He was a man completing an unpleasant but necessary task. As the sun set and the guests began to depart, Margaret pulled Eliza aside one last time. "Your room is still your room," she said quietly. "The decision about other arrangements is yours and Rowan's to make when you're ready. There's no rush." Eliza nodded, grateful for the reprieve. The thought of sharing a bed with that cold, silent man was more than she could process tonight. By 10 o'clock, the house was quiet again. The neighbors had gone home, the ranch hands had returned to the bunkhouse, and Margaret had retired to her room. Only Rowan and Eliza remained in the main room, 2 strangers bound by vows and gold rings. "I'll bank the fire," Rowan said. His first words to her since "I do." "Thank you." He moved to the fireplace, his movements efficient and practiced. Eliza watched him, this man who was now her husband, and felt the vast distance between them like a physical thing. "Rowan," she said quietly. He paused, not turning around. "I know you didn't want this. I know I'm not what you would have chosen, but I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere. So we can make the best of it, or we can make each other miserable. I'd prefer the former." Silence. Then, "I don't know how to do this." His voice was raw, barely above a whisper. "I don't know how to be a husband. I don't know how to care. Not anymore." "Then don't," Eliza said simply. "Don't try to be something you're not. Just let me work. Let me help. That's all I'm asking for." He turned then, his gray eyes finding hers across the dim room. In the firelight, his face looked less harsh, more human, tired, lost. "I can do that," he said finally. It wasn't much. It wasn't love or even affection, but it was honest, and it was a start. "Good night, Rowan." "Good night, Eliza." He said her name carefully, as though testing the shape of it in his mouth. Then he turned and climbed the stairs to his room, leaving her alone with the dying fire and the gold band on her finger. Eliza sat for a long time in the darkness, listening to the house settle around her. Somewhere in the rafters, a mouse scratched. Outside, the wind howled across the frozen valley. And upstairs, through the thin walls, she could hear the creak of bed springs as her husband tried to sleep. Mrs. Eliza Hale. She tested the name silently, feeling its weight. It didn't feel real yet. Maybe it never would. But it was hers now, and she would wear it with the same steady determination she'd brought to everything else in her life. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. Tomorrow she would start building a life in this frozen place, with this frozen man, and somehow make it work. Tonight, though, she was just tired. Eliza climbed the stairs to her small room and changed out of the beautiful blue dress, hanging it carefully in the wardrobe. She put on her plain nightgown and crawled into bed, pulling the heavy quilt up to her chin. Sleep came slowly, carried on the wind that rattled the windows and whispered across the snow. And in that space between waking and dreaming, Eliza Harper Hale allowed herself one final thought. I am not beautiful, but I am here, and I will survive. The first weeks of marriage passed in a rhythm of work and careful silences. Eliza rose before dawn each morning, dressing quickly in the cold darkness of her small room. She would find Margaret already awake despite her illness, stubbornly insisting on helping with breakfast until Eliza gently but firmly relegated her to supervisory duties only. Rowan would appear from the barn as the sun crested the mountains, his face raw from the cold, his hands stiff with it. He ate quickly, spoke little, and disappeared back into his domain of cattle and horses and endless winter work. It was a lonely existence, but Eliza had known loneliness before. At least here, her loneliness had purpose. She threw herself into the work of the ranch with single-minded determination. The account books became her territory, every expenditure tracked and justified, every penny accounted for. She discovered waste, small leaks that had gone unnoticed for months. A merchant in town charging inflated prices for grain, a contract with a freight company that could be renegotiated for better terms. She presented her findings to Rowan one evening after supper, laying out the numbers with quiet confidence. He'd studied her calculations in silence, his scarred finger tracing the columns of figures. Then he'd looked up at her with something that wasn't quite respect, but was closer to it than anything she'd seen before. "How much can you save us?" he'd asked. $200 over the next 6 months. Maybe more if I can find a better supplier for the winter feed. Do it. 2 words, but they carried weight. Trust, grudging and careful, but trust nonetheless. The household accounts came next. Eliza reorganized the pantry with ruthless efficiency, cataloging every jar of preserves, every sack of flour, every precious luxury like coffee and sugar. She created systems where chaos had reigned, instituting a rotation for the linens, a schedule for deep cleaning, a method for tracking which tools needed repair or replacement. Margaret watched all of this with barely concealed delight. "You're exactly what this place needed," she said one afternoon as they sat by the fire. Eliza mending and Margaret wrapped in shawls against the chill that never quite left her bones. Order out of chaos. I haven't seen the pantry this organized since I was your age. It's just practical, Eliza said, threading her needle through a torn work shirt. Everything in its place means less waste, less time searching, less money spent replacing things that get lost or ruined. It's more than practical. It's love. Eliza's hands stilled. I don't understand. Margaret smiled, that sad, knowing smile that seemed to contain all the wisdom of her 67 years. Taking care of a home, making it run smoothly, that's love, child. Maybe not the romantic kind, but love all the same. You're building something here, whether you realize it or not. Eliza wanted to argue, to insist that she was simply doing her job, fulfilling her end of the bargain. But something in Margaret's eyes stopped her. The older woman was dying, and she desperately needed to believe that her son would be cared for after she was gone. If calling it love gave Margaret peace, then Eliza would let her believe it. He's starting to notice you, Margaret continued, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Oh, he tries to hide it, but I see the way he watches you when you're working, the way he listens when you talk about the accounts. You're reaching him, Eliza, slowly but surely. Eliza wasn't so certain. Rowan remained as distant as ever, a wall of stone and silence that showed no signs of crumbling, but she'd caught him watching her once or twice, a quick glance across the dinner table, a brief moment of attention when she spoke. Small things, meaningless things. But Margaret was right about one aspect. He was noticing her, even if he didn't want to. 3 weeks after the wedding, a warm spell broke the worst of the winter cold. The temperature climbed to an almost balmy 20 degrees, and the sun emerged from behind the perpetual gray clouds. Rowan announced at breakfast that he was moving the cattle to a fresh pasture and would be gone most of the day. Gideon and I can handle it, he said, already halfway to the door. No need to send lunch. But Eliza saw the drawn look around Margaret's eyes, the way the older woman's hands trembled as she held her coffee cup. She made a decision. I'll bring lunch anyway, Eliza said. You need to eat properly, and Gideon's wife mentioned he forgets meals when he's working. Rowan paused, his hand on the doorframe. It's a long ride, 4 miles out to the south pasture. I can ride. In this snow? I grew up in Boston, not a hothouse. I can manage a horse in 4 miles of snow. Something flickered across his face, surprise maybe, or grudging approval. Suit yourself. We'll be near the old line shack if you can find it. He left before she could respond. Eliza spent the morning preparing a proper meal. Roast beef sandwiches, boiled eggs, apples, and a thermos of hot coffee. She packed everything carefully into a saddlebag, along with extra food in case the men had worked through breakfast as well. Then she bundled herself in one of Margaret's heavy coats and wool scarves and headed to the barn. The ranch hands were already out working. The barn was quiet except for the soft sounds of horses moving in their stalls. Eliza selected the gentlest-looking mare, a dappled gray with kind eyes, and managed to saddle her with only minor difficulty. It had been years since she'd ridden, a few stolen afternoons when she'd worked for a family with a country estate outside Boston. But the motions came back to her. You be good to me, Eliza murmured to the mare, stroking her soft nose. I'm trusting you to get us there and back safely. The ride out was harder than she'd anticipated. The snow had crusted over in places, making the footing treacherous. The mare picked her way carefully, but there were moments when Eliza's heart climbed into her throat as the horse stumbled or slid. The cold bit through her layers, and her hands grew numb despite her gloves. But she pressed on, following the tracks left by Rowan and Gideon's horses. The landscape was brutally beautiful. White valleys surrounded by dark mountains, the sky a crystalline blue that seemed to stretch forever. Eliza had never seen so much space, so much emptiness. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. She found them just past noon, exactly where Rowan had said they'd be. The old line shack was a weathered structure barely larger than a shed, but it provided a windbreak for the men and horses. Rowan and Gideon were moving cattle through a gate, their breath and the cattle's breath creating clouds of steam in the cold air. Rowan saw her first. He rode toward her, his face unreadable beneath his hat. You actually came, he said. I said I would. Eliza dismounted carefully, her legs stiff from the ride. I brought lunch. Gideon approached, a broad smile creasing his weathered face. "Mrs. Hale, that's mighty kind of you. We were just saying how we should have eaten before we left." "Then my timing is perfect." Eliza began unpacking the saddlebag. "There's enough for both of you, and hot coffee to warm you up." The three of them sat in the lee of the line shack, eating and drinking in companionable silence. Gideon kept up a running commentary about the cattle, pointing out which cows were looking good and which ones might have trouble calving come spring. Rowan said little, but Eliza noticed he'd positioned himself to block the wind from hitting her directly. A small kindness, probably unconscious. But it was there. "How's Miss Margaret doing?" Gideon asked, his voice careful. Everyone knew Margaret was dying, but no one spoke of it directly. "She has good days and bad days," Eliza said honestly. "Today is a good day. She was bossing me around the kitchen this morning like a general commanding troops." Gideon chuckled. "That sounds like her. Toughest woman I ever knew, begging your pardon, ma'am." "No pardon needed. She's tough." "She's dying." Rowan's voice was flat, emotionless. "We don't need to pretend otherwise." An uncomfortable silence fell. Gideon studied his boots. Eliza met Rowan's eyes steadily. "Yes," she said quietly. "She's dying. But she's also living, right now, today, and I'd rather focus on that than on what's coming." Rowan's jaw tightened. For a moment, Eliza thought he might lash out, might throw her words back in her face, but he just stood abruptly, dumping the dregs of his coffee into the snow. "We should get back to work. Daylight's burning." Eliza packed up the remains of lunch while the men returned to moving cattle. She should have headed back to the house then, but something made her stay. She tied her mare to the line shack fence and climbed up to sit on the top rail, watching as Rowan and Gideon worked. They moved with the practiced efficiency of men who'd done this 1,000 times. Rowan sat his horse like he'd been born in the saddle, guiding the cattle with subtle shifts of weight and quiet commands. When a young steer broke from the group and tried to bolt, Rowan cut him off with lightning reflexes, his horse responding to commands Eliza couldn't even see. It was the first time she'd seen him do something with anything approaching grace. The first time she'd glimpsed the man he might have been before grief carved him into stone. "Your husband's one of the best cattlemen in the territory," Gideon said, appearing beside her fence perch. "Could have sold this place 10 times over for a fortune, but he won't leave. Says the land's in his blood. Why would anyone want him to sell?" "Mining companies, mostly. There's copper in these mountains, and they've been sniffing around for years. Rowan keeps turning them down flat." Gideon squinted out at the cattle. "This ranch? It's all he has left of his family. His pa built it from nothing. His brother died defending it in the range wars. I think Rowan would rather die himself than let it go to strangers." Eliza absorbed this information, fitting it into the puzzle of the man she'd married. Not just grieving, but afraid. Afraid of losing the last connection to the people he'd loved. Afraid of change. Afraid of anything that might crack the careful control he'd built around his heart. "Thank you for telling me," Eliza said. "He's a good man, Mrs. Hale. Hard man, but good. He'll treat you fair." "I know." And she did. Rowan was cold and distant, but he wasn't cruel. He'd given her shelter and safety and a place to belong. That was more than she'd had in Boston. She rode back to the ranch as the sun began its descent toward the mountains. The temperature dropped rapidly once the sun lost its power, and by the time Eliza reached the barn, her fingers were numb inside her gloves. She unsaddled the mare with stiff, clumsy movements, rubbed her down as best she could, and made sure she had hay and water before stumbling toward the house. Margaret was waiting by the fire, worry etched deep in her face. "Thank heavens," she breathed when Eliza came through the door. "I was about to send someone looking for you. You're frozen solid." "I'm fine," Eliza said through chattering teeth. "Just cold." Margaret pulled her to the fire, helping her out of the frozen coat and wrapping her in warm blankets. She pressed a cup of hot tea into Eliza's hands and watched until she'd drunk half of it. "You shouldn't have gone," Margaret scolded gently. "It's too dangerous in this weather." Rowan needed to eat. Rowan is a grown man who's been taking care of himself for years. Maybe that's the problem. Eliza wrapped her hands around the warm cup, feeling sensation slowly return to her fingers. Maybe he's been taking care of himself for so long that he's forgotten how to let anyone else help. Margaret's expression softened. You understand him. I don't know about that, but I recognize someone who spent too long alone. I was that person in Boston. I know what it does to you, how you build walls so high that eventually you can't find the door anymore. And you think you can help him find his door? Eliza shook her head slowly. I think all I can do is stand outside and knock occasionally, whether he lets me in or not. That's his choice. Rowan returned an hour after dark, snow-covered and exhausted. He stopped short when he saw Eliza curled in the chair by the fire, still wrapped in blankets. You made it back, he said. So did you. I know these trails blindfolded. You could have gotten lost, frozen. The horse could have thrown you. Was that concern in his voice? Eliza studied his face, but it was closed as always, revealing nothing. But I didn't, she said simply. I made it back safely, and you and Gideon had a proper lunch. Everyone wins. Rowan opened his mouth as if to argue, then seemed to think better of it. Next time, don't come. It's not safe. Next time, eat breakfast before you leave, and I won't have to. A muscle twitched in his jaw. He turned to hang up his coat, and Eliza could have sworn she saw the ghost of a smile threatening the corner of his mouth. But when he turned back, his face was stone once more. Dinner that night was quiet, but not uncomfortable. Margaret told stories about the ranch's early days, when she and Thomas had worked side by side to carve civilization out of wilderness. Rowan listened without comment, but Eliza noticed he didn't leave the table immediately after eating as he usually did. He stayed refilling his coffee cup, a silent participant in his mother's reminiscences. Later, as Eliza was banking the fire for the night, Rowan appeared beside her. The mare you took today, Birdie, he said without preamble. She's yours now. If you're going to ride out, you should have a horse that knows you. Eliza straightened, surprised. That's generous, but I don't need... You do need. A woman on a ranch needs to ride, and Birdie's steady. She won't spook easy. He paused, then added gruffly, My mother likes you. It would kill her if something happened to you because you were riding an unfamiliar horse. What about you? The question escaped before Eliza could stop it. Would it bother you? Rowan's gray eyes met hers, and for a moment she saw something flicker in their depths. Surprise, maybe, or confusion, as though the question had never occurred to him. You're my wife, he said finally. It's my duty to keep you safe. Duty, of course. What else would it be? Thank you for the horse, Eliza said quietly. He nodded once and retreated to his room, leaving Eliza alone with the dying fire and a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the embers. The days lengthened incrementally as February gave way to March. Margaret's condition worsened with each passing week. She spent more time in bed, her face growing gaunt, her movements slowed by pain she tried desperately to hide. Eliza took over all the household duties without complaint, rising even earlier to ensure everything was done before Margaret woke. But the older woman's spirit remained fierce. On her good days, she would sit in the kitchen and direct Eliza in the making of preserves or the proper way to render lard. She told stories, passed down wisdom, shared secrets about managing a ranch household that couldn't be found in any book. The men respect strength, Margaret said one afternoon as they sorted through the summer kitchen supplies. Not cruelty or hardness, strength. The ability to make decisions and stand by them. Don't apologize for being competent, Eliza. These men will test you, especially after I'm gone. They'll want to see if you fold or if you hold firm. What did you do when they tested you? Margaret's smile was sharp as a knife. I fired the worst offender in front of everyone and dared the rest to try me. After that, we understood each other perfectly. Eliza laughed despite herself. I'll keep that in mind. You'll do fine. You've got steel in your spine. I saw that the moment you stepped off that train. You just need to trust it. Rowan remained distant but present. He no longer spoke only when necessary. He would offer observations about the ranch, ask Eliza's opinion on small matters, mention which hands were working hard and which were slacking. Small intimacies of daily life, shared in his careful, measured way. And once, just once, Eliza woke in the middle of the night to hear voices downstairs. She crept to her door and listened, Rowan and Margaret talking quietly by the dying fire. She's good for this place, Margaret was saying. Good for you, whether you'll admit it or not. I'm not capable of giving her what she deserves. Rowan's voice was raw. I'm broken, Ma. There's nothing left inside me but anger and ice. That's not true. You're hurt and you're scared, but you're not broken. And Eliza doesn't need you to be perfect. She just needs you to try. I don't know how. Then learn. You learned everything else. How to run a ranch, how to survive loss, how to keep going when you wanted to quit. Learn how to let someone in again. It won't kill you, I promise. Silence. Then so quietly Eliza almost missed it. I'm afraid. I know, son. I know. Eliza retreated to her bed, her heart aching for the man downstairs who carried so much pain he could barely function. She wanted to help him, wanted to reach through that wall of ice and pull him back to the world of the living. But she didn't know how, and Margaret was running out of time to teach her. March brought false spring, a week of warm days that melted the snow and turned the roads to impassable mud. The cattle began moving more, restless with the changing season. And Margaret's condition took a sharp turn for the worse. She collapsed in the kitchen on a Tuesday morning, her legs simply giving out beneath her. Eliza caught her before she hit the floor and called for Rowan, who was in the barn. Together, they carried Margaret to her bed, her body frighteningly light in their arms. I'm fine, Margaret insisted, even as her face went gray with pain. Just tired. I'll rest a bit and be good as new. But she wasn't fine. Doctor Pemberton rode out from town that afternoon, examined her in private, then delivered his verdict with the clinical detachment of a man who'd seen too much death to be moved by it anymore. A month, maybe less. Keep her comfortable. There's nothing more to be done. Rowan took the news like a body blow. He stood rigid in the hallway outside his mother's room, his hands clenched into fists at his sides, his face a mask of such carefully controlled anguish that Eliza wanted to weep for him. Rowan, she began. Don't! The word came out strangled. Just don't! He walked away, out of the house and into the gathering darkness. Eliza watched him go, helpless and aching, then returned to Margaret's bedside. The older woman was awake, her eyes bright with unshed tears. He'll need you, Margaret said without preamble. When I'm gone, he'll try to retreat completely. You can't let him. Promise me you won't let him disappear into that frozen place inside his head. I promise, Eliza said, taking Margaret's thin hand in hers. I'll do everything I can. Make him laugh. That's the key. He used to laugh all the time before Samuel died. If you can make him laugh again, even once, you'll have found the crack in his armor. I'm not particularly funny. Neither was I, but I made Thomas laugh every day for 38 years. You'll find your way. Margaret squeezed her hand weakly. I'm glad you came, Eliza. I'm glad my son won't be alone. You're not gone yet, Eliza said fiercely. Don't talk like you are. Denial is a luxury I can't afford anymore. Margaret's smile was sad but peaceful. I've made my peace with what's coming. Now I need you to promise me something else. Anything. Give him time, but don't give him forever. Push him. Challenge him. Don't let him hide behind duty and work for the rest of his life. He deserves happiness, even if he doesn't believe it anymore. I'll try. That's all I ask. Rowan didn't return until after midnight. Eliza heard him come in, heard him pause outside Margaret's door, heard the nearly silent sound of the door opening and closing. She imagined him sitting beside his mother's bed, keeping vigil in the darkness. The next morning, everything changed. Rowan appeared at breakfast with a new hardness in his eyes, a new set to his jaw. He'd retreated behind his walls completely, sealing himself off from the pain of what was coming. I'm riding to Bitterroot to finalize the spring contracts, he announced. I'll be gone 3 days. Gideon's in charge of the ranch. Eliza, you handle the house and my mother. Rowan, you can't leave now, Eliza protested. Your mother needs you here. My mother needs this ranch to survive after she's gone. That means securing contracts now before the other ranchers snap up all the buyers. His voice was flat, emotionless. Gideon knows what to do if anything happens while I'm away. That's not the point. It's exactly the point. This ranch is what matters. This is what I can control. He grabbed his coat and hat. I'll be back Friday. He was gone before Eliza could formulate another argument. Margaret took the news with weary resignation. "He's running," she said simply. "He knows what's coming, and he can't bear to watch it happen." "How can he just leave you?" Eliza demanded, anger and hurt making her voice sharp. "Because he's terrified. Because watching me die will break him completely, and he knows it. So he runs to something he can control, contracts and buyers and business." Margaret patted Eliza's hand. "Don't be angry with him. He's doing the best he can with the tools he has." But Eliza was angry. Angry at Rowan for abandoning his mother in her final days. Angry at death for coming too soon. Angry at herself for caring about a man who couldn't seem to care about anything except his precious ranch. She channeled that anger into work, caring for Margaret with fierce tenderness. She sat beside the older woman's bed, reading aloud from books Margaret loved. She made special meals designed to tempt a failing appetite. She changed linens and administered the laudanum Dr. Pemberton had left for pain, and pretended not to notice when Margaret's hands shook or when she cried quietly in the dark hours before dawn. On the third night, Margaret's breathing changed, became labored and rattling. Eliza sent one of the hands racing to town for the doctor and another to Bitterroot to fetch Rowan home. Dr. Pemberton arrived first, grim-faced and carrying his black bag. He examined Margaret briefly, then shook his head. "Tonight, probably. Tomorrow morning at the latest. Keep her comfortable. That's all we can do now." Eliza dismissed him and returned to Margaret's bedside, taking up her vigil. She held the older woman's hand, whispering comfort, wiping the sweat from her brow as the hours crawled past. Dawn was breaking when hoofbeats thundered into the yard. Rowan burst through the door, still wearing his riding coat, his face haggard. "Ma?" His voice cracked on the word. "She's still here," Eliza said quietly. "She's been waiting for you." Rowan crossed to the bed in 3 long strides. He dropped to his knees beside his mother, taking her hand in both of his. "I'm here, Ma. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I left." Margaret's eyes fluttered open. Her lips moved, but no sound came out at first. Rowan leaned closer. "My boy," she whispered finally. "My beautiful boy. Don't do this alone. Promise me." "I promise," Rowan said, his voice breaking. "I promise, Ma. Take care of each other. She loves you, even if she doesn't know it yet." Eliza's breath caught, but Margaret wasn't finished. "And you love her too. You're just too scared to admit it. Ma, let yourself love her, Rowan. Let yourself be happy. Samuel would want that. I want that." Each word was a struggle now, her breath coming in short gasps. "Don't waste the years I won't have." "I won't, I promise." Margaret smiled, her eyes drifting closed. "Good boy. Such a good boy." Her breathing steadied, became easier. For a moment, Eliza thought perhaps the crisis had passed, but then Margaret's hand went slack in Rowan's grip, and the rattle in her chest went quiet. Just like that, she was gone. Rowan made a sound, something between a sob and a roar of anguish. He pressed his mother's hand to his forehead, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Eliza stood frozen, witnessing his grief, unable to bridge the distance between them even now. Finally, carefully, she placed her hand on his shoulder. He didn't pull away. They stayed like that as the sun rose. Rowan kneeling beside his mother's body, Eliza standing behind him with one hand on his shoulder, the only comfort she knew how to offer. And for the first time since she'd arrived at Ironwood Ridge, the wall between them cracked just a little, just enough to let a sliver of light through. They buried Margaret on a hillside overlooking the valley, in a plot beside Thomas Hale and the small wooden cross that marked where Samuel's body had been laid to rest. The entire territory seemed to attend, ranchers and their families, merchants from town, drifters who'd worked the ranch years ago and traveled back to pay respects. Even the circuit judge made the journey from Helena, his black coat flapping in the spring wind. Rowan stood at the graveside like a statue carved from granite, his face empty of expression, his eyes fixed on some distant point beyond the mountains. He didn't speak during the service. He didn't weep. He simply stood there, rigid and alone, despite being surrounded by mourners. Eliza remained close but not touching, respecting the chasm of grief that separated him from the world. She accepted condolences on behalf of them both, thanked people for coming, manage the logistics of feeding dozens of unexpected guests. It was easier to focus on the work than to acknowledge the hollow ache in her own chest. She'd known Margaret less than 2 months, but the older woman's absence left a wound that surprised Eliza with its depth. Margaret had been kind when kindness wasn't required. She'd offered acceptance without judgment, wisdom without condescension. She'd made Eliza feel valued in a way no one else ever had. And now she was gone, leaving Eliza alone with a husband who'd sealed himself inside a fortress of ice. The last mourners departed as the sun touched the western mountains. Gideon and the ranch hands drifted back to the bunkhouse, leaving Rowan and Eliza alone in the gathering dusk. The house loomed before them, dark and silent. "I should light the lamps," Eliza said quietly. Rowan didn't respond. He stood in the yard, staring at the house as though it were a stranger's dwelling, someplace he'd never seen before. "Rowan? I can't go in there." His voice was rough, scraped raw. "Not yet." "Then we'll stay out here until you're ready." "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to, but I'm going to anyway." Eliza wrapped her shawl tighter against the evening chill. "Take whatever time you need." They stood in silence as the stars emerged overhead, cold and distant and indifferent. The temperature dropped steadily. Eliza's feet grew numb inside her boots, but she didn't move. She'd promised Margaret she wouldn't let Rowan disappear, and she meant to keep that promise. Finally, when the cold had become truly punishing, Rowan stirred. "She planned it all, you know," he said suddenly. "The wedding, bringing you here. Every bit of it was calculated to trap me into having someone after she was gone." "I know." "Does that bother you? Being used as a tool in her scheme?" Eliza considered the question honestly. "No. Because her scheme gave me something I needed too. A home, a purpose. I'm grateful for that. Even if the circumstances were manipulative." Rowan's jaw clenched. "She told me I loved you. Right at the end, she said I loved you and was too scared to admit it." The words hung between them like smoke. Eliza's heart hammered against her ribs, but she kept her voice steady. "Do you? I don't know what love feels like anymore. I don't know if I'm capable of it." He turned to face her finally, his eyes shadowed and haunted. "I know you deserve better than what I can give you. I know my mother was wrong to trap you in this marriage. And I know that if you wanted to leave, go back to Boston or anywhere else, I wouldn't stop you." "I don't want to leave." "Why not?" "Because leaving would mean returning to invisibility, to a life of grinding loneliness and endless work with nothing to show for it. Because despite everything, this frozen ranch and this frozen man felt more like home than Boston ever had. Because Margaret's death had shown Eliza something important, that love could exist in unlikely places, between unlikely people, if they were brave enough to reach for it. But she couldn't say any of that, not to a man who was barely holding himself together. "Because I made a promise," she said instead, "to your mother and to you. In sickness and in health, for better or worse. I don't break my promises." Something flickered across Rowan's face, relief, maybe, or gratitude. "Then we should go inside. You're freezing." He was right. She was trembling with cold, her teeth chattering despite her efforts to control them. Rowan shrugged out of his heavy coat and draped it around her shoulders without asking permission. The fabric still held his warmth. "Come on," he said quietly, and led her into the dark house. The days that followed were strange and terrible. The house felt wrong without Margaret's presence, too quiet, too empty, like a body missing its heart. Eliza moved through the rooms mechanically, performing tasks that no longer seemed to have meaning. She cooked meals that neither she nor Rowan had appetite for. She cleaned already clean surfaces. She sat in Margaret's rocking chair by the fire and felt like an imposter. Rowan threw himself into ranch work with manic intensity. He rose before dawn and didn't return until after dark, pushing himself in the hands with brutal efficiency. Fences were repaired, calving preparations were finalized, equipment was serviced and organized. Every task that could be done was done, and then done again to higher standards. He was running from grief the only way he knew how, by working until he was too exhausted to feel anything. Eliza understood the impulse. She'd done the same thing in Boston after her parents died. But understanding didn't make it easier to watch him slowly destroy himself. A week after the funeral, Gideon appeared at the kitchen door just after dawn, his hat in his hands and worry carved deep in his weathered face. "Mrs. Hale, I need to speak with you." Eliza set down the bread dough she'd been kneading and wiped her hands on her apron. "What's wrong?" "It's Rowan. He's pushing too hard. Yesterday he worked 16 hours straight without stopping for food or water. This morning he was up before me, already out checking the north pasture in the dark. He's going to kill himself if he keeps this up." "I know, but I don't know how to stop him." Gideon twisted his hat between his gnarled hands. "With respect, ma'am, you're his wife. He might listen to you." "He doesn't listen to anyone. He barely acknowledges I exist." "That's not true. I've seen the way he watches you when you're not looking. He's aware of you, even if he won't admit it." Gideon met her eyes steadily. "Miss Margaret, she asked me to look after Rowan if anything happened to her, but I can't reach him. Maybe you can." Eliza wanted to argue, to insist that she had no power over Rowan's self-destructive spiral. But she'd made a promise to Margaret, and Gideon was right. She had to at least try. "Where is he now?" "North pasture. Same place he's been every morning this week, checking fence that doesn't need checking." Eliza made a decision. She packed a basket with food and coffee, saddled Bertie, and rode out before she could talk herself out of it. She found Rowan exactly where Gideon said he'd be, riding the fence line with grim concentration. He looked terrible, his face gaunt, dark circles shadowing his eyes, his movements stiff with exhaustion. When he saw her approaching, his expression flickered between irritation and something that might have been relief. "What are you doing out here?" he demanded. "Bringing you breakfast and stopping you from working yourself to death." "I'm fine." "You're not fine. You're destroying yourself, and everyone can see it except you." Eliza dismounted and began unpacking the basket with deliberate calm. "So you're going to sit down, eat something, and talk to me. Or I'm going to follow you around all day getting in your way until you do." Rowan's jaw clenched. "I don't need a nursemaid." "Good, because I'm not offering to be one. I'm offering to be your wife. There's a difference." They stared at each other across the space between their horses, a battle of wills that neither wanted to lose. Finally, Rowan dismounted with visible reluctance. "5 minutes," he said, "however long it takes." They sat in the new spring grass, still brown and dormant, but showing hints of green at the roots. Eliza handed Rowan a sandwich and a cup of coffee, watching until he took a bite. "Gideon's worried about you," she said. "The hands are worried. I'm worried. There's nothing to worry about. I'm just working. You're running. There's a difference." Rowan's hands tightened around his coffee cup. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Don't I? I did the same thing after my parents died, worked myself sick trying to outrun the grief. It doesn't work, Rowan. Eventually you have to stop running and face it." "And what happens when I face it?" The words came out harsh, ragged. "What happens when I stop moving long enough to feel everything I've been avoiding? I'll fall apart, I'll shatter, and this ranch needs me functional, not broken." "The ranch needs you alive, and right now you're barely that." Eliza set down her own cup and turned to face him fully. "Margaret wouldn't want this. She wouldn't want you sacrificing yourself on the altar of productivity." "Don't tell me what my mother would want." Rowan's voice was sharp as a blade. "You knew her for 2 months. I knew her my entire life." "Then you know I'm right. She spent her last breath begging you to let yourself be happy, to not waste the years she wouldn't have. Is this what she meant? Working yourself into an early grave?" Rowan stood abruptly, coffee sloshing over the rim of his cup. "You don't understand. This ranch, it's all I have left of them. My father built it. My brother died for it. My mother held it together when I fell apart after Samuel was killed. If I let it fail, if I let it slip through my fingers because I was too weak to keep going, you're not weak. You're grieving. There's a difference. In my experience, they're the same thing." He turned away, his shoulders rigid with tension. "When Samuel died, I fell apart. I abandoned the ranch for 6 months chasing revenge. My mother had to run everything alone while I hunted the man who killed him. By the time I came back, she'd aged 10 years. I did that to her, my weakness, my inability to let go. I stole years from her life." Understanding crashed over Eliza like a wave. This wasn't just about Margaret's death. This was about guilt, deep, corrosive guilt that had been eating at Rowan for 5 years. "That's why you left when she was dying," Eliza said quietly. "You thought if you kept the ranch running, if you stayed strong and functional, it would somehow make up for abandoning her before. It doesn't matter now. She's gone. It matters. Because you're still punishing yourself for something that wasn't your fault. Samuel's death wasn't your fault. Margaret's illness wasn't your fault. And grieving them doesn't make you weak. It makes you human." Rowan's shoulders shook. For a moment, Eliza thought he might actually break, might let the tears he'd been holding back for a week finally fall. But he locked down hard, forcing everything back behind that familiar wall. "I need to finish checking this fence," he said, his voice carefully controlled. "Thank you for bringing breakfast." Eliza recognized a dismissal when she heard one. She could push harder, could force the confrontation he so desperately needed, but some instinct told her this wasn't the moment. She'd planted a seed. Now she had to give it time to take root. "I'll expect you home for supper," she said. 6 o'clock. If you're not there, I'm riding back out to find you." "You don't have to—" 6 o'clock, Rowan." She mounted Bertie and rode back toward the ranch house, feeling his eyes on her the entire way. That evening, Rowan appeared in the kitchen at precisely 6 o'clock, still wearing his work clothes but with his hands scrubbed clean. He sat at the table without speaking and ate the meal Eliza had prepared, roast chicken with potatoes and early spring greens from Margaret's carefully tended cold frame. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Over the following weeks, a fragile routine established itself. Eliza would pack a midday meal and ride out to wherever Rowan was working. Sometimes he would talk, sharing observations about the ranch or asking her opinion on business matters. More often, they sat in companionable silence, eating and watching the land slowly transform as spring took hold. The snow retreated to the highest peaks. The grass turned green. Wildflowers appeared in riotous profusion, lupine and Indian paintbrush, and delicate alpine forget-me-nots. The cattle grew fat on new grass, and the first calves were born, wobbly-legged and impossibly small. Life, insisting on itself despite death's shadow. Rowan began to soften, degree by infinitesimal degree. He started coming home for supper at reasonable hours. He would linger after meals, helping Eliza with dishes or sitting by the fire while she mended. He didn't talk about Margaret or Samuel or his grief, but his silences became less hostile, more contemplative. And sometimes, when he thought Eliza wasn't watching, she would catch him looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. Confusion, maybe, or wonder, as though he couldn't understand why she stayed. One evening in late April, Eliza found him standing in Margaret's room, holding one of his mother's shawls in his scarred hands. "I should pack up her things," he said without turning around. "Give them to people who can use them, but I can't seem to make myself do it." "Then don't. Not yet." Eliza stepped into the room, moving to stand beside him. "There's no timeline for grief. You take whatever time you need." She'd say I was being sentimental. She hated waste. She'd understand. She loved you. Rowan's fingers tightened on the soft wool. "I never told her often enough that I loved her, that I appreciated everything she did. I just assumed she knew." "She did know. I saw the way she looked at you. She knew." He was quiet for a long moment, then carefully folded the shawl and placed it back in the trunk at the foot of Margaret's bed. "Keep whatever you want. Wear her dresses if they fit. She'd like that, knowing they were being used instead of rotting in a trunk." "Are you sure?" "She was going to be your mother, too. She would have wanted you to have them." His voice roughened. "She loved you, you know. Near the end, she told me how grateful she was that you'd come. Said you were exactly what this place needed." Eliza's throat tightened. "I loved her, too. I know I didn't have much time with her, but she was kind to me in a way no one else had been. I'll miss her." "Yeah." Rowan's hand brushed against Eliza's, a touch so brief it might have been accidental. "Me too." They stood together in Margaret's empty room as the light faded outside, two people learning to carry their grief side by side. May brought the first real warmth of spring and an unexpected visitor. Eliza was in the garden, Margaret's garden, which she'd claimed as her own project, when a rider appeared on the road from town. Not one of the hands or a neighbor, but a stranger on a fine black horse, riding with the easy confidence of a man used to being in control. Eliza wiped the dirt from her hands and shaded her eyes, watching as the rider approached. He was perhaps 40, well-dressed in a city suit that seemed absurdly formal for ranch country. When he dismounted, his movements were smooth and practiced. "Good afternoon," he called, removing his hat to reveal dark hair shot through with distinguished gray. "I'm looking for Rowan Hale. Is he available?" "Who's asking?" "James Cantrell, representing the Copper Mountain Mining Company. I have a business proposition for Mr. Hale." Every instinct Eliza possessed screamed warning. She remembered what Gideon had told her, mining companies circling the ranch like vultures trying to buy land that Rowan would never sell. "Mr. Hale is working. If you want to leave a message, I can pass it along." "I'd prefer to speak with him directly. This is a rather substantial offer, one that could make him a very wealthy man." Cantrell's smile was practiced and insincere. "You must be the new Mrs. Hale. I heard Rowan had taken a bride. My congratulations." "Thank you, but my husband isn't interested in selling." "Has he told you that explicitly? Because I find that men often change their minds when they understand the scope of what's being offered. We're prepared to pay $30,000 for mineral rights to the northern section of his property. That's more money than most ranchers see in a lifetime." $30,000. The number was staggering. But Eliza had seen Rowan's face when he talked about this land, had heard the reverence in his voice when he described the work his father had done to build the ranch. Money wouldn't sway him. "He won't sell," Eliza said firmly. "Not for $30,000 or $300,000. This land has been in his family for 30 years. It's not for sale." Cantrell's smile never wavered, but something cold flickered in his eyes. "Perhaps I should hear that from Mr. Hale himself. No offense, ma'am, but business decisions of this magnitude should be made by the man of the house." Heat flooded Eliza's cheeks, embarrassment and anger in equal measure. Before she could formulate a response, Rowan's voice cut across the yard. "My wife speaks for both of us, and she's right. The land's not for sale." He approached from the barn, moving with that predatory grace Eliza had noticed when he rode. His face was hard, unwelcoming. Cantrell's smile faltered slightly. "Mr. Hale, if we could just discuss—" "Nothing to discuss. You've had your answer. Now get off my property." "I understand you're a man of principle, but surely—" "Off my property." Rowan's hand drifted toward the gun at his hip. Not a threat exactly, but a clear indication that he was done being polite. Cantrell raised his hands in a gesture of surrender. "Of course. My apologies for the intrusion, but if you change your mind, the offer stands. $30,000, Mr. Hale. Think about what that could buy." He mounted his horse and rode off at a leisurely pace, his back straight and his posture radiating confidence that said this wouldn't be his last attempt. Rowan watched until he disappeared from sight, then turned to Eliza. "Did he threaten you?" "No, he was polite, just condescending." "Mining companies are like rats. You see one, there's always more hiding in the walls." Rowan's jaw clenched. "They've been after this land for years." "My father refused to sell. I've refused to sell, but they keep coming back offering more money, acting like everyone has a price." "Do you?" Eliza asked quietly. "Have a price, I mean?" Rowan looked at her as though she'd suggested he murder someone. "This ranch is my family's legacy. My father's sweat is in this soil. My brother's blood watered these fields. My mother died knowing I'd protect it. There isn't enough money in the world to make me sell." The fierce conviction in his voice stirred something in Eliza's chest, pride maybe, or admiration. In a world where everything could be bought and sold, Rowan's loyalty to his family's memory was unshakable. "Good," she said, "because I told him the same thing, that you'd never sell, not for any price." Something shifted in Rowan's expression, surprise giving way to something warmer, almost like approval. "You did?" "Of course. I'm your wife. We stand together, even against mining companies with more money than sense." Rowan was quiet for a moment, studying her with those penetrating gray eyes. Then, so quietly she almost missed it, he said, "Thank you." 2 words, but they carried weight Eliza felt down to her bones. That night, for the first time since Margaret's death, Rowan sought Eliza out after supper. She was in the small office working on the monthly accounts when he appeared in the doorway. "Can I come in?" Eliza glanced up, surprised. "Of course, it's your house." "It's our house." He entered and settled into the chair across from her desk, Margaret's chair, which he'd avoided for weeks. "I wanted to talk to you about Cantrell's visit. I'm sorry if I overstepped. I know I should have just taken his message and let you handle it, but you didn't overstep. You did exactly right." Rowan leaned forward, his forearms resting on his knees. "But I need you to understand something. The mining companies, they don't give up easy. Cantrell will be back, probably with a higher offer. And if money doesn't work, they've been known to use other methods." "What kind of methods?" "Intimidation, sabotage, making life difficult until selling seems like the easier option." His expression darkened. 10 years ago, when my father was still alive, they tried to drive us out. Fence cutting, poisoned water holes, mysterious fires. My father and the hands fought back hard enough that they eventually moved on to easier targets. But they haven't forgotten about this land. Fear prickled at the base of Eliza's spine. "Are you saying we're in danger?" "I'm saying we need to be careful. Keep your eyes open. Don't ride out alone without telling someone where you're going. And if you see strangers on the property, come find me immediately." "You're frightening me." "Good. You should be frightened. These aren't men who play fair." Rowan reached across the desk and covered her hand with his. The first time he'd initiated physical contact since their wedding kiss. "I won't let anything happen to you, I swear it. But I need you to be smart and cautious." Eliza turned her hand over, lacing her fingers through his. His palm was warm and calloused, solid and real. "We'll be careful together, both of us." "Both of us," he agreed. They sat like that for a long moment, hands clasped across the desk, something fragile and precious building in the space between them. Then Rowan pulled away, standing abruptly as though embarrassed by the intimacy. "I should let you finish your work," he said. "Rowan?" Eliza waited until he turned back to face her. "Thank you for trusting me today, for backing me up when Cantrell tried to dismiss me. You're my wife, my partner. Anyone who disrespects you disrespects me." His mouth quirked in what might have been the ghost of a smile. "Besides, you were right. The land's not for sale. It never will be." After he left, Eliza sat staring at the ledgers without seeing them, her hand still warm from his touch. Something was changing between them, slow as spring ice melting, but undeniable. The wall he'd built around his heart was developing cracks, and Eliza could glimpse the man beneath the armor. A man worth fighting for, worth staying for, worth loving if he would let her. The following weeks brought an uneasy tension to the ranch. Strangers were spotted on the property boundaries, riders who claimed to be passing through but who seemed far too interested in the ranch's layout. Fence posts were found cut in the north pasture, forcing the hands to spend precious time on repairs. One of the hay barns developed a mysterious leak that ruined 2 weeks' worth of stored feed. Nothing definitive. Nothing that could be traced back to the mining company. But the message was clear. Cantrell hadn't given up. Rowan responded by increasing security. He hired 2 additional hands whose primary job was to patrol the property boundaries. He invested in better locks for the barns and outbuildings. He taught Eliza how to shoot, spending long afternoons in the meadow behind the house until she could hit a target with reasonable accuracy. "I don't want to scare you," he said as she reloaded the rifle for another practice round, "but I need to know you can defend yourself if necessary." Eliza raised the rifle, sighted down the barrel, and put a bullet through the center of the target. "I'm not scared, I'm angry. These people think they can bully us into submission. They're wrong." Pride flickered across Rowan's face. "That's my girl." The casual endearment hit Eliza like a physical blow. My girl. As though she belonged to him. As though he'd claimed her as more than just a convenient arrangement. Their eyes met across the space between them, and Eliza saw heat there. Awareness. Desire. Something that made her breath catch in her throat. For a moment she thought he might close the distance, might finally breach the last barriers between them. But then a shout from the direction of the barn shattered the moment. Rowan's head snapped toward the sound, his hand automatically dropping to his gun. "Stay here," he ordered, already moving. "Like hell," Eliza muttered, following him at a run. They found chaos in the barn. One of the hands, a young man named Billy, lay unconscious in the dirt while Gideon crouched beside him. Blood streamed from a gash on Billy's forehead. "What happened?" Rowan demanded. "Found him like this 10 minutes ago," Gideon said grimly. "Looks like someone hit him from behind. The lock on the tack room's been broken, and half our good saddles are gone." Rowan's face went hard as granite. "How many?" "4 saddles, 3 bridles, and all the new rope we just bought. Maybe $200 worth of gear." "Did Billy see who did it?" "Haven't been able to wake him yet to ask." Eliza pushed forward, kneeling beside the unconscious hand. She examined the wound carefully, ugly, but not life-threatening. "Help me get him inside. He needs to be cleaned up and watched for signs of concussion." Between Rowan and Gideon, they carried Billy into the house and laid him on the settee in the main room. Eliza worked quickly, cleaning the wound and bandaging it with practiced efficiency. She'd tended enough injuries in Boston boarding houses to know what she was doing. Billy regained consciousness as she was finishing, his eyes fluttering open with a groan. "Easy," Eliza said softly. "You took a hard knock to the head. Just lie still." "Mrs. Hale?" Billy's voice was confused, slurred. What happened?" "We were hoping you could tell us," Rowan said, moving to stand beside the settee. "Did you see who hit you?" Billy's face scrunched with the effort of remembering. "I was checking the tack room like you asked, making sure everything was secure. Then I heard something behind me and I turned, but it's all black after that." "I'm sorry, Mr. Hale. I should have been more careful." "Not your fault. They were professionals. They knew what they were doing." Rowan's jaw clenched. "Rest now. We'll talk more when your head clears." Outside, away from Billy's hearing, Gideon voiced what they were all thinking. This wasn't random theft. This was a message. "I know." Rowan stared toward the northern boundary of the property, where copper-rich mountains glittered in the afternoon sun. "Cantrell's escalating, the fence cutting, and the barn leak. Those were warnings. This is different. This is them showing us they can get to us whenever they want, hurt our people, steal from us, and we can't stop them." "So what do?" Gideon asked. "We don't give them what they want. We don't sell. And we make it clear that the next person who sets foot on this property, uninvited, is going to have a very bad day." Rowan turned to face his foreman. "Double the patrols, no one rides alone. Everyone carries a weapon, and if you see strangers, you don't confront them. You come get me immediately." "Yes, sir." After Gideon left, Eliza touched Rowan's arm. "This is going to get worse, isn't it?" "Yes." "Are you scared?" Rowan looked down at her, and for once his expression was completely open. No walls, no armor, just raw honesty. "Terrified. Not for myself, but for you, for the hands, for everyone who depends on this ranch. I can handle threats against me, but if they hurt you—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Eliza saw the truth written in every line of his face. Somewhere between the funeral and the shooting lessons, between the shared meals and the midnight conversations, Rowan had started to care. Maybe not love, not yet, but something real and fierce that made him willing to fight. "They won't hurt me," Eliza said firmly, "because we're going to be smart and careful, and we're going to protect each other, together." "Together," Rowan echoed. Then, surprising them both, he pulled her into his arms. A brief, fierce embrace that spoke of fear and determination and something that felt dangerously close to hope. When he released her, his hands lingered on her shoulders for a heartbeat longer than necessary. "I'm glad you're here," he said quietly. "I'm glad you stayed." "So am I." The storm was coming. They both knew it. But for the first time since Eliza had arrived at Ironwood Ridge, she and Rowan would face it not as strangers bound by obligation, but as partners learning to trust each other. And maybe, just maybe, as something more. The attack came on a Tuesday night in early June when the world was soft with summer and the air smelled of wildflowers and new grass. Eliza had fallen asleep in her small room listening to the wind whisper through the eaves, lulled by the familiar sounds of the ranch settling into darkness. She dreamed of Boston, strange, fragmented images of snow-covered streets and the boarding house where she'd lived, Margaret's voice calling her name from somewhere she couldn't reach. The sound of gunfire tore her from sleep. She bolted upright, heart hammering, momentarily disoriented. Another shot cracked through the night, followed by shouting. Orange light flickered against her window. Wrong, all wrong. Fire. Eliza threw off her blankets and ran to the window. The hay barn was burning, flames already climbing 30 feet into the black sky. Dark figures moved in the yard. Too many to count in the chaos. More gunfire, the distinctive crack of rifles, men yelling orders she couldn't make out over the roar of the fire. Her door crashed open. Rowan stood there, fully dressed, gun in hand, his face stark with fear. Get dressed. Now. We're under attack. What's happening? Cantrell's men, maybe a dozen of them. They fired the barn and they're moving on the house. He grabbed her arm, pulling her toward him with bruising force. Listen to me carefully. Get dressed, grab whatever you can carry, and go to the root cellar. There's a tunnel that leads out to the creek. Follow it and keep going until you reach the Michelson Ranch. Don't stop. Don't come back. Don't wait for me. Do you understand? I'm not leaving you. See, Eliza! He gripped her shoulders, his gray eyes blazing. If they take this house, if they get to you, I can rebuild the barn. I can replace cattle. But I cannot lose you. Please, please do this for me. The raw desperation in his voice shattered any argument she might have made. She nodded, throat too tight for words. Good girl, go. Now. He released her and was gone, his boots pounding down the stairs. Eliza forced herself to move, to think through the terror clawing at her chest. She dressed in seconds, pulling on Margaret's sturdy wool dress and boots. She grabbed her mother's Bible and the small leather pouch where she kept her wedding ring when working. She'd started wearing it every day since Margaret's death, but had taken it off tonight while washing dishes. Another explosion of gunfire from outside. Glass shattered somewhere downstairs. Men shouting, the acrid smell of smoke seeping through the floorboards. Eliza ran for the back stairs that led to the kitchen, keeping low. She could hear fighting in the main room, furniture crashing, the heavy thud of bodies colliding, Rowan's voice roaring something she couldn't make out. Every instinct screamed at her to help him, to fight beside him. But she'd made a promise. The kitchen was empty but filling with smoke. Eliza grabbed a lamp and headed for the pantry, where a trap door concealed the entrance to the root cellar. She'd explored it weeks ago, marveling at the tunnel Thomas Hale had dug as an emergency escape route during the range wars. It had seemed like paranoid excess then. Now it might save her life. She lifted the trapdoor and descended the narrow ladder, pulling the door shut above her. Darkness swallowed her immediately. She fumbled with the lamp, getting it lit with shaking hands. The root cellar stretched before her, shelves of preserved goods, barrels of flour and salt, and at the far end, a low opening that marked the tunnel entrance. Eliza had to crouch to enter the tunnel, the lamp held before her casting wild shadows on the earthen walls. The passage was barely 4 feet high and reinforced with wooden beams that creaked ominously as she moved. It smelled of damp earth and rot and fear. She'd gone perhaps 50 feet when the world exploded behind her. The force of the blast knocked her forward, extinguishing her lamp and plunging her into absolute darkness. Dirt rained down from the tunnel ceiling. One of the support beams groaned and shifted. Eliza scrambled forward on hands and knees, driven by pure animal terror, expecting the tunnel to collapse on top of her at any moment. Fresh air hit her face like a benediction. She'd reached the exit, a narrow opening concealed by brush on the bank of the creek. Eliza hauled herself out and collapsed on the wet grass, gasping, her hands bleeding from scraping against rocks in the darkness. Behind her, back toward the ranch, the sky glowed orange and red. The explosions had stopped, but she could hear shouting, the crack of scattered gunfire. The barn was fully engulfed now, a pillar of flame that turned night into hellish day. Rowan was still in that inferno, fighting, maybe dying. Eliza pushed herself to her feet, every cell in her body screaming at her to run back, to help, to do something other than flee like a coward. But she'd promised. She'd promised to run, to survive, to reach the Michelson Ranch. She turned toward the dark forest and started walking. The Michelson Ranch was 5 miles through rough country that Eliza had never traversed on foot. She had no light, no weapon, no clear sense of direction beyond the general location Rowan had mentioned once in passing. But she put one foot in front of the other and kept moving, driven by a determination that surprised her with its ferocity. She would survive this. She would reach help. And then she would make whoever had done this pay for every moment of terror they'd inflicted. The forest was alive with night sounds, owls calling, small creatures rustling through the undergrowth, the distant howl of a wolf that made her blood run cold. Eliza's dress caught on branches, tore, became weighted with mud as she forded a shallow stream. Her hands were cut from falls she couldn't prevent in the darkness. Her lungs burned. Her legs trembled with exhaustion. But she kept moving. Dawn was breaking when she finally stumbled out of the tree line and saw the Michelson ranch spread across a small valley. Smoke rose from the chimney, people awake, starting their day. Eliza tried to call out, but her voice emerged as a croak. She staggered forward, her legs finally giving out when she was still 100 yards from the house. She hit the ground hard and didn't get up. The next thing she knew, hands were lifting her, voices exclaiming in shock. She was being carried, blankets wrapped around her shaking body, someone pressing a cup of water to her lips. "Mrs. Hale, can you hear me? What happened?" Eliza forced her eyes open. A woman's face swam into focus. Martha Michelson, whom Eliza had met briefly at Margaret's funeral. Kind eyes, weathered face, capable hands. "Attack," Eliza managed. "Ironwood Ridge, fire, men with guns. Rowan, I don't know if he's—" "Hush now, save your strength. Jacob," Martha called to someone Eliza couldn't see. "Ride to town and get the sheriff. Tell him there's been an attack on the Hale Ranch, and send someone to gather the neighbors. Quick now." Eliza was carried into the warm kitchen and settled into a chair by the fire. Martha worked with practiced efficiency, cleaning Eliza's cuts, wrapping her bleeding hands, pressing hot tea into her grip. "Can you tell me what happened?" Martha asked gently. Eliza's teeth chattered so hard she could barely speak, but she forced the words out. The midnight attack, the fire, Rowan sending her through the tunnel, the explosion that had nearly buried her alive, her desperate flight through the forest. "How many men attacked?" Martha asked, her face grim. "I don't know. 12, maybe more. Rowan said they were Cantrell's people, the mining company." Martha's lips thinned to a hard line. "Those bastards have been circling the Hale land for years. Never thought they'd go this far." "I have to go back," Eliza said, trying to stand. "Rowan's still there? He might be hurt. He might need—" "You're in no condition to help anyone. You can barely stand." Martha pressed her back into the chair with gentle firmness. "My husband and the boys are gathering a group to ride to Ironwood Ridge. They'll find Rowan and the others, I promise you. But you need to stay here and rest." "I can't rest. Not while he's—" Eliza's voice broke. The reality of what had happened was crashing over her in waves. Rowan could be dead. The house could be destroyed. Everything they'd built together could be ashes. And she'd run. She'd abandoned him when he needed her most. "He told you to run, didn't he?" Martha said, reading Eliza's face with the accuracy of a woman who'd survived her own share of hardship. "Made you promise to get to safety?" "Yes." "Then you did exactly right. You honored his wishes and you survived. That takes more courage than staying to fight would have." "It doesn't feel like courage. It feels like cowardice." "Courage isn't the absence of fear, child. It's doing what needs to be done despite the fear." Martha squeezed Eliza's shoulder. "You'll see your husband again. Have faith." But faith was hard to maintain as the hours crawled past. Martha's husband, Jacob, and their 2 grown sons rode out with a group of neighboring ranchers, all armed and grim-faced. Eliza sat by the window watching the road, her hands clenched so tight her nails drew blood from her palms. Mid-morning brought the first rider back, one of the Michelson boys, his face soot-stained and exhausted. "The fire's out," he reported. "Haybarn's a total loss, but they saved the house and the other outbuildings. 5 hands wounded, none dead, thank the heavens." "And Mr. Hale? Is he alive?" Eliza demanded, on her feet before she realized she'd moved. "Alive and meaner than a cornered wolf. He's got a bullet graze across his ribs and more bruises than I can count. But he's on his feet organizing the cleanup. Soon as we told him you'd made it here safe, he about collapsed with relief." The tension that had been holding Eliza together like piano wire suddenly snapped. She sat down hard, tears streaming down her face before she could stop them. Alive. Rowan was alive. "Easy now," Martha soothed, wrapping an arm around Eliza's shoulders. "He's safe. You're both safe. That's what matters." But even as relief flooded through her, anger was building beneath it. Cantrell had done this, had ordered men to burn their home, terrorize them, possibly kill them. And for what? Land, copper ore, profit. I want to go back, Eliza said, wiping her eyes. I need to see him, to help. Give them a few more hours to secure the area and tend to the wounded. Then I'll have one of the boys drive you home in the wagon. You're in no shape to ride. Eliza wanted to argue, but Martha was right. Her hands were bandaged. Her body was one massive bruise, and exhaustion was pulling at her like an undertow. She let Martha guide her to a bed in the spare room, but sleep wouldn't come. She lay staring at the ceiling, replaying the attack in her mind, seeing the orange glow of fire reflected in Rowan's eyes as he ordered her to run. She must have dozed eventually, because Martha was shaking her awake, saying it was safe to return to Ironwood Ridge now. Eliza dressed in borrowed clothes. Her own dress was ruined beyond repair, and climbed into the wagon beside young Tom Michelson for the ride home. Home. The word resonated in her chest with unexpected power. Somewhere between arriving as an unwanted bride and fleeing through a dark tunnel with bullets flying, Ironwood Ridge had stopped being Rowan's ranch and had become theirs. Her home. Worth fighting for. Worth bleeding for. The damage was worse than she'd expected and better than she'd feared. The hay barn was gone, reduced to smoking timbers and ash. Scorch marks blackened the side of the main house where fire had tried to spread but had been beaten back. The yard was churned to mud, littered with spent shells and broken equipment, but the house stood. The other barn stood. And in the midst of the destruction, men were already working, clearing debris, tending to wounded horses, organizing salvage efforts. Eliza climbed down from the wagon on unsteady legs, scanning the chaos for Rowan. She found him near the ruins of the hay barn, shirt off despite the cool morning air, his torso wrapped in bandages that were already seeping blood. He was directing two hands on where to stack salvageable timbers, his voice hoarse but commanding. Then he turned and saw her. For a moment, they just stared at each other across the 20 feet of devastated earth that separated them. Eliza saw the moment recognition hit, saw his eyes widen, his face transform from grim determination to something raw and unguarded. He crossed the distance in 4 long strides and pulled her into his arms with enough force to drive the air from her lungs. His hands were in her hair, on her back, touching her as though he needed physical confirmation that she was real. "You're alive," he said against her hair, his voice breaking. "You made it. I've been half crazy not knowing. I'm here. I'm okay." Eliza pulled back enough to see his face, her hands framing his jaw. "You're hurt. Your ribs." "Flesh wound. I've had worse." He didn't release her, his arms remaining locked around her waist as though he feared she might disappear if he let go. "When the house exploded, when I realized they'd set charges in the cellar, I thought the tunnel had collapsed. I thought you were buried alive and I'd sent you there. I'd killed you by telling you to run. The tunnel held. I got out. I did what you told me to do." Eliza pressed her palm against his chest, feeling his heart hammering beneath her fingers. "I kept my promise. Thank heaven for that." Rowan's forehead dropped to rest against hers, his eyes closing. "I can lose everything else. The barns, the cattle, the whole damned ranch. But not you. I can't lose you." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning, not because she was useful, not because she managed the accounts or took care of the house, but because somewhere in the past months she'd become essential to him in a way that had nothing to do with practical considerations. "You won't lose me," Eliza said softly. "I'm not going anywhere." Around them, the cleanup continued. Hands worked with determined efficiency, pretending not to notice their boss clutching his wife in the middle of the destroyed yard. Gideon approached carefully, clearing his throat. "Hate to interrupt, but the sheriff's here. Wants to talk to both of you." Rowan straightened reluctantly, keeping one arm around Eliza's shoulders as they turned to face the lawman. Sheriff Tom Brady was a hard-faced man in his 50s, with cold eyes and a reputation for being more interested in keeping the peace than pursuing justice. He stood beside his horse, surveying the damage with an expression that gave away nothing. "Mr. Hale, Mrs. Hale." He nodded to each of them. "Hell of a mess you've got here." "Hell of an attack we survived," Rowan said flatly. Dozen armed men, multiple fires, explosives. This wasn't random vandalism, Sheriff. This was an organized assault. You have any proof of who did it? James Cantrell and the Copper Mountain Mining Company. They've been pressuring me to sell for months. When I refused, they escalated. Brady's expression didn't change. That's a serious accusation. You got witnesses? Anyone who can identify the attackers? It was dark, and they wore masks, Gideon interjected. But they knew the layout of the ranch too well for it to be random. Someone scouted us before the attack. Still not proof. Without witnesses or evidence directly tying Cantrell to this attack, there's nothing I can do. Brady's tone was almost apologetic, but Eliza heard the underlying message. He wasn't going to pursue this. So we're just supposed to accept this? Eliza demanded. They nearly killed us. They destroyed our property. And you're saying there's no consequence? I'm saying the law requires proof, ma'am, and right now you don't have any. Brady adjusted his hat. My advice? Hire more security. Maybe reconsider that mining company's offer. Sometimes it's better to take the money and avoid future trouble. Rowan's arm tightened around Eliza, the only sign of his rage. His voice remained dangerously calm. Get off my property, Sheriff, and tell Cantrell that if he sends his men here again, they'll leave in coffins. Brady's eyes narrowed. That sounds like a threat, Mr. Hale. It's a promise. This is my land, and I have every right to defend it. The law might not protect me, but I sure as hell will protect myself. The sheriff stared at Rowan for a long moment, then shrugged. Your funeral. But don't say I didn't warn you. The mining companies have deep pockets and long reach. They don't like being told no. He mounted his horse and rode away, leaving Eliza trembling with impotent fury. He's in Cantrell's pocket, she said. That's why he won't help us. Most likely, the mining companies own half the officials in this territory. Rowan's jaw was clenched so tight Eliza could see the muscle jumping. We're on our own. Gideon spat in the dirt. Then we handle it ourselves. I've got 3 brothers in Wyoming who know their way around trouble. I can send for them. Do it. And double the wages for anyone willing to stay and fight. This ranch is about to become a fortress. Rowan looked at Eliza, his gray eyes burning with determination. I need to know you're with me on this. It's going to get dangerous. If you want to leave, go stay with the Michelsons or in town until this is over. I'll understand. Eliza thought about the fear that had gripped her in the tunnel, the desperation of her flight through the forest. She thought about Margaret's words, that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but action despite it. And she thought about the man standing beside her, bloody and bruised and still standing, offering her an escape even though she could see in his eyes how much he needed her to stay. I'm not leaving, she said firmly. This is my home too, my fight too. We're in this together. Something fierce and bright flared in Rowan's eyes, pride maybe, or love, or some combination of both. He cupped her face in his scarred hands and kissed her with an intensity that took her breath away. Not the perfunctory brush of lips from their wedding day, but something deep and claiming and real. When he pulled back, his voice was rough. Together then. All the way. All the way, Eliza echoed. The next 2 weeks transformed the ranch into an armed camp. Gideon's brothers arrived from Wyoming, hard men with cold eyes who'd fought in range wars and cattle disputes across 3 territories. Additional hands were hired, vetted carefully for loyalty and competence. Weapons were distributed, guard rotations established, defensive positions prepared. The house itself became a fortress. Windows were reinforced with heavy shutters. The tunnel entrance was repaired and expanded, with supplies cached along its length in case another evacuation became necessary. A warning bell was installed in the barn that could be heard across the entire ranch. And through it all, Rowan and Eliza worked side by side. She learned to reload rifles quickly, to spot riders at a distance, to identify the sound of approaching horses versus cattle. He taught her defensive positions, escape routes, how to move quietly, and how to shoot to kill if necessary. But it wasn't all preparation for war. In the quiet moments between guard shifts and security improvements, something deeper was growing between them. Rowan sought her out with increasing frequency, sitting beside her at meals, working near her in the garden, finding excuses to touch her hand or shoulder in passing. And at night, when the house was locked down and guards patrolled the perimeter, he began spending time in her room. Not for romance, not yet, but for connection. They would sit together in the lamplight, talking about everything and nothing. He told her stories about his childhood, about Samuel's wild pranks and Margaret's fierce love. She shared her own memories of Boston, of her parents, of the loneliness that had defined her life before Ironwood Ridge. "I was invisible there," she said one night, mending a shirt while Rowan cleaned his rifle at her small desk. "I could have disappeared and no one would have noticed for weeks." "I notice you," Rowan said quietly. "I see everything you do. The way you've organized this household, the way you handle the accounts, the courage you showed during the attack. You're the furthest thing from invisible I've ever known." Eliza's hands stilled on the mending. "When did that happen? When did I stop being an obligation and become something else?" Rowan was quiet for a long moment, his hands moving over the rifle with practiced precision. "I don't know exactly. Somewhere between you riding out in the snow to bring me lunch and you standing up to Cantrell. Somewhere between my mother's death and you promising to stay despite the danger. You got under my skin, Eliza, and now I can't imagine this place without you." "Is that love?" Eliza asked, her heart hammering, "or just dependence?" He set down the rifle and turned to face her fully. "I don't know. I haven't let myself feel anything real for 5 years. But I know that when I thought you might be dead, buried in that tunnel, it felt like my heart was being ripped out of my chest. I know that I think about you constantly, that I look for excuses to be near you, that the thought of you leaving terrifies me more than anything Cantrell can throw at us. If that's not love, it's close enough to scare the hell out of me." Eliza set aside her mending and crossed to where he sat. She placed her hands on his shoulders, feeling the tension coiled in his muscles. "I'm scared too," she admitted. "I've spent my whole life being unwanted, unnoticed. And now you're telling me you need me, you see me, and I don't know how to trust it. What if this is just proximity and danger making you feel things that won't last?" "Then we'll find out together." Rowan's hands came up to rest on her waist, his touch gentle despite the calluses. "I'm not asking you to trust me completely right now. I'm just asking you to stay, to give us, a chance to become whatever it's meant to be." "I already told you I'm staying. I meant it." "I know, but I needed to hear it again." He pulled her closer until she was standing between his knees, her hands still on his shoulders. "These past weeks, having you here, working beside you, it's shown me what I've been missing, what I gave up when I locked myself away after Samuel died. I don't want to be that man anymore, Eliza, the frozen one, the dead one. I want to live again." "Then live," Eliza whispered. "We'll figure out the rest as we go." He stood, pulling her into his arms, and kissed her with a tenderness that made her chest ache. It was different from the fierce claiming after the attack. This was softer, sweeter, a promise rather than a declaration. When they finally separated, both breathing hard, Rowan rested his forehead against hers. "Move into my room," he said, "not because you have to, but because I want you there. I want to fall asleep beside you and wake up knowing you're safe. I want this marriage to be real in every way." Eliza's heart raced. This was the moment she'd been both hoping for and dreading, the final step from convenience to genuine partnership, from obligation to choice. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes." That night, Eliza moved her few belongings into Rowan's room, the room that had been his parents', then his alone, and now would be theirs together. It was larger than hers, with windows facing east to catch the sunrise and a bed big enough for two. She felt strange and nervous and excited all at once. Rowan was gentle with her, patient with her inexperience, careful to make their first true joining about connection rather than simple desire. And afterward, as they lay tangled together in the darkness, Eliza felt the last walls between them finally crumble. This was real. This was permanent. This was love, even if neither of them had quite found the courage to say the word yet. Outside, guards patrolled the perimeter and kept watch for approaching danger. Tomorrow would bring new threats, new challenges, new battles to fight. But tonight, in the sanctuary of their shared bed, Rowan and Eliza held each other close and dared to believe that together they could survive anything, even what was coming next. The warning came 3 days later, delivered by a drifter who rode into the yard at dawn with a bullet hole in his shoulder and fear in his eyes. Eliza was in the kitchen when she heard the commotion outside. She grabbed the rifle that now lived beside the door and hurried into the yard where Rowan and Gideon were helping the injured man down from his horse. Blood soaked through his shirt, and his face was gray with pain and exhaustion. "Get him inside," Rowan ordered. Eliza fetched the medical supplies. They laid the stranger on the kitchen table, and Eliza worked quickly to cut away his shirt and examine the wound. The bullet had passed clean through the meat of his shoulder. Painful, but not fatal if infection didn't set in. "What's your name?" Rowan asked as Eliza cleaned and bandaged the wound. "Cole Hutchins. I've been doing odd jobs around the territory." The man's voice was tight with pain. "I was hired 2 weeks ago by a man named Rourke. Said he needed help with a mining operation." Eliza's hands froze. Rowan's face went absolutely still. A terrible blankness that was somehow worse than rage. "Clint Rourke?" Rowan's voice was deadly quiet. "That's the one. Big fellow, scar on his neck, mean as a snake. He's been gathering men, gunfighters mostly, paying top dollar for anyone willing to kill." Cole's eyes darted between Rowan and Eliza. "I didn't know what the job was when I signed on. But 2 days ago, I heard him and Cantrell talking. They're planning another attack on this ranch, bigger than the last one. They mean to burn you out completely or kill you trying." The blood drained from Eliza's face. Beside her, Rowan had gone absolutely rigid, his hands clenched into fists. "When?" Rowan demanded. "Tomorrow night. They've got 20 men assembled at an old mining camp 15 miles north of here. They're waiting for weapons to arrive from Helena, then they ride." Cole winced as Eliza tied off the bandage. "I tried to slip away, warn you. Rourke caught me at it. That's how I got shot." "Why warn us?" Gideon asked suspiciously. "What's in it for you?" "Nothing, but I've done some bad things in my life, and I'm trying to do better. Killing a man and his wife over land rights, that's a line I won't cross." Cole looked at Rowan directly. "Rourke hates you personal. Says you killed his brother 5 years ago. This ain't just about the mining company anymore. This is revenge wrapped up in profit." Rowan's face was like carved stone. "Jack Rourke was his brother?" "Twin brother. Clint's been hunting you ever since, waiting for the right moment. When Cantrell offered him money to drive you off your land, it was like all his birthdays came at once." Cole's expression was grim. "He means to make you watch while they burn everything you love. Then he'll kill you slow." Those were his exact words. Eliza felt ice slide down her spine. This wasn't just about the ranch anymore. This was personal, vicious, designed to inflict maximum suffering before death. Rowan stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the wooden floor. "Gideon, gather everyone in the main room, now. We have planning to do." Within minutes, every hand and hired gun on the ranch was assembled. Rowan stood before them, his face hard but his voice steady as he laid out the situation. "Clint Rourke is coming for us tomorrow night with 20 armed men. They mean to kill me, my wife, and anyone who stands with us. They want this land, and they're willing to commit murder to get it." He paused, letting that sink in. "I won't force any man to stay and fight. If you want to leave, do it now with my thanks and your full wages. No shame in choosing survival over someone else's war." No one moved. The ranch hands exchanged glances, but none made for the door. "We're with you, boss," one of the younger hands said, his voice cracking slightly. "All the way." "They burned our barn and shot at us," another added. "This is our fight, too." Gideon stepped forward, his weathered face set with determination. "You've treated us fair for years, Rowan, paid good wages, never cheated us, stood by us when times were hard. We don't abandon our own. Besides," he grinned without humor, "my brothers didn't ride all the way from Wyoming just to miss a good fight." Rowan's throat worked visibly. "Then we make our stand here, but we do it smart." He moved to the table where a rough map of the ranch had been spread. "They'll expect us to defend the house. That's where we were during the last attack. So we give them what they expect, but we add a surprise." He traced his finger along the map, outlining his plan. It was brutal in its simplicity. They would appear to defend the house as before, but with most of their force hidden in strategic positions around the property. When Rourke's men attacked, they would spring the trap, catching the attackers in a crossfire from multiple directions. The canyon trail is the only approach that provides cover all the way to the ranch buildings, Rowan explained. That's where they'll come from. We'll have men positioned on the canyon rim with clear firing positions. When they're committed to the trail, we close the back door and hit them from 3 sides. What about Mrs. Hale? One of the hands asked. She needs to be somewhere safe. No. Eliza's voice was firm, brooking no argument. I'm not hiding in a root cellar while the rest of you fight for our home. I can shoot well enough to be useful. Eliza, but Rowan started. Don't you dare. She met his eyes steadily. You said we're partners. That means I stand with you, not behind you. I've already run once. I won't do it again. The muscle in Rowan's jaw clenched, but he could see the determination in her face. You stay with me then, where I can see you. If things go bad, you follow my orders without question. Agreed? Agreed. The rest of the day was spent in feverish preparation. The hands who would take positions on the canyon rim left before dark, moving into place under cover of the remaining daylight. Weapons were cleaned and loaded, extra ammunition distributed. Every person knew their position, their role, their fallback point if the plan went wrong. As the sun set, Eliza found herself alone with Rowan in their bedroom, both of them checking their weapons with mechanical precision. The silence between them was heavy with unspoken fears. If this goes wrong, Rowan began. It won't, Eliza interrupted, but if it does. He set down his rifle and turned to face her fully. If something happens to me, you take the tunnel. You run, and you don't look back. There's money hidden in the office, behind the false panel, in the bookshelf. Enough to start over anywhere you want. Stop talking like you're already dead. I need you to know. His voice cracked slightly. I need you to know that these past months with you have been the best of my life. You brought me back from a place I didn't think I could return from. You made me remember what it feels like to be alive, to hope, to love. Eliza's eyes burned with tears she refused to shed. Then you'd better survive this, because I'm not done with you yet. We have years ahead of us, Rowan Hale. Years of running this ranch together, of building something neither of us had before we found each other. He pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. I love you, he said against her hair. I should have said it weeks ago, but I was too afraid, too convinced that I didn't deserve it. But I do love you, Eliza. More than I thought I was capable of loving anyone. I love you too. The words came easily, naturally, because they were simply true. I think I started falling for you the day you gave me Birdie, maybe even before that. You're a good man, Rowan, a strong man, and I'm proud to stand beside you. They kissed with desperate intensity, pouring everything they couldn't say into the connection of lips and breath and touch. When they finally separated, both were trembling. Whatever happens tomorrow, Eliza whispered, we face it together. Together, Rowan agreed. The night crawled past with agonizing slowness. No one slept. The house was dark and silent, every window shuttered, every person at their assigned position. Eliza crouched beside Rowan near a window that gave a view of the canyon trail, her rifle loaded and ready, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. The attack came 2 hours before dawn. They heard it first, the distant sound of many horses moving through the canyon. Then the orange glow of torches appeared, bobbing through the darkness like malevolent fireflies. Eliza counted 15, maybe 20 riders moving in a tight group down the narrow trail. Steady, Rowan murmured to the handful of men positioned with them in the house. Let them get close. Let them commit. The riders emerged from the canyon mouth and fanned out across the yard, torches held high. In their flickering light, Eliza could see hard faces and drawn weapons. And at the front, a man who could only be Clint Rourke. Huge, scarred, radiating violence like heat from a forge. Rowan Hale! Rourke's voice boomed across the yard. I know you're in there, you murdering son of a bitch! Come out and face me like a man! Silence from the darkened house. You killed my brother, shot him down like a dog and left him to rot in the dirt. Now I'm going to do the same to you, but slower. I'm going to make you watch while I burn everything you've built. Then I'm going to take that pretty wife of yours and make her scream before I... He never finished the sentence. Rowan's rifle cracked from the window, and one of Rourke's men toppled from his saddle with a scream. All hell broke loose. Rourke's men returned fire, bullets slamming into the shuttered windows and thick walls of the house. But they'd forgotten to watch their backs. From the canyon rim, from the barn, from concealed positions around the property, Rowan's men opened fire. The crossfire was devastating. Horses screamed and bolted. Men dove for cover that didn't exist. The night exploded into chaos. Gunfire, shouting, the acrid smell of black powder smoke thick enough to choke on. Eliza fired methodically, the way Rowan had taught her. Aim, breathe, squeeze, aim, breathe, squeeze. She didn't let herself think about the men falling, the blood, the screams. She just focused on protecting the home she'd built, the man she loved, the life they'd fought so hard to create. Beside her, Rowan fought with cold precision. Every shot counted, every movement calculated. He was protecting his land, yes, but more than that, he was protecting her. She could see it in the set of his shoulders, the fierce concentration on his face. "They're breaking!" Gideon's voice shouted from somewhere in the darkness. "They're trying to retreat!" But the canyon behind them was now blocked by Rowan's men, and the crossfire made staying in the yard suicide. Rourke's force was being systematically destroyed, caught in the trap Rowan had laid. Rourke himself had taken cover behind a water trough, screaming orders that no one followed. His men were surrendering, throwing down weapons, raising hands in the universal gesture of defeat. In less than 10 minutes, the attack had turned into a rout. Then Rourke did something desperate and insane. He broke from cover, running not away from the house but toward it, firing wildly as he came. Bullets chewed into the doorframe as he crashed through, into the main room where Rowan and Eliza were positioned. "Finally!" Rourke roared, his gun tracking toward Rowan. "I've waited 5 years for this, you bastard!" Time seemed to slow. Eliza saw Rowan's rifle swinging around, too slow, the angle wrong. She saw Rourke's finger tightening on the trigger, death written in his twisted grin. She didn't think. She just moved. Eliza threw herself forward, her shoulder hitting Rowan's side, knocking him down as Rourke's gun fired. The bullet meant for Rowan's heart tore through her left shoulder instead, spinning her around and slamming her into the wall. The pain was incredible, white-hot and all-consuming. Eliza's legs buckled. She heard Rowan screaming her name, heard the crack of his rifle firing once, twice, 3 times, heard a heavy body hitting the floor with terminal finality. Then strong arms were catching her before she could fall, lowering her carefully to the ground. "Eliza, stay with me. Stay with me." Rowan's face swam into focus above her, twisted with anguish. "You're going to be okay. You hear me? You're going to be fine." Did I save you?" Her voice sounded distant, dreamy. "Yes, you stubborn, brave, idiotic woman. You saved me." His hands were pressed against her shoulder, trying to stop the bleeding. "Why? Why did you do that? Together, remember?" Eliza managed a weak smile. "All the way." "Don't you dare die on me," Rowan commanded, his voice breaking. "Don't you dare. I just found you. I'm not losing you now." "Not planning to." The pain was fading, which Eliza distantly recognized as a bad sign. "Love you so much." "I love you too. Stay awake, Eliza, please." But the darkness was pulling at her, gentle and insistent. She let it take her, secure in the knowledge that Rowan was safe. That was all that mattered. Eliza woke to sunlight and pain. The sunlight was streaming through a familiar window, her bedroom window, now their bedroom window. The pain radiated from her left shoulder in waves that made her gasp. "Easy. Don't try to move." Martha Michelson's face appeared in her line of sight, kind and worried. "You've been unconscious for 2 days. The bullet went clean through, but you lost a lot of blood." "Rowan?" Eliza croaked. "Right here." He appeared on her other side, looking like death warmed over. His face was haggard, unshaven, his eyes red-rimmed from lack of sleep, but he was alive and whole, and the relief that flooded Eliza at the sight of him was almost overwhelming. "You scared 10 years off my life," Rowan said roughly, taking her uninjured hand in both of his. "The doctor said it was touch and go, that if you'd lost much more blood, but I didn't." Eliza squeezed his fingers weakly. "I'm here. We both are." Thanks to you throwing yourself in front of a bullet like a crazy person. You would have done the same for me. That's different. How? Rowan didn't have an answer for that. He just pressed her hand to his lips, his eyes closing. What happened? Eliza asked. After Rourke. Rourke's dead. I put 3 bullets in him before he hit the ground. Rowan's voice was flat, emotionless. The rest of his men surrendered. Turns out half of them were just hired guns with no real loyalty to the cause. When they saw how badly outmatched they were, they gave up without much fight. And Cantrell? In custody. The territorial governor sent marshals once word reached Helena about the attack. Turns out burning ranches and hiring assassins crosses a line even corrupt officials can't ignore. Cantrell's facing murder charges, conspiracy, attempted arson. He'll hang or spend the rest of his life in prison. Rowan's expression was grim with satisfaction. The Copper Mountain Mining Company is being dissolved. Their assets seized. It's over, Eliza. Really over. Relief made her lightheaded. The ranch? Still standing. We lost 4 good men in the fight and another 6 wounded. But the buildings are intact, the cattle are safe, and we've got enough money from selling off Cantrell's equipment to rebuild the hay barn twice over. He stroked her hair gently. We won. We survived. Together, Eliza whispered. Together. Recovery was slow and frustrating. The doctor had ordered complete bed rest for 2 weeks, which drove Eliza half mad with boredom and restlessness. But Rowan was there constantly, reading to her, bringing her meals, helping her when she needed to move without tearing the stitches. The tenderness he showed during her recovery revealed a side of him Eliza had only glimpsed before. He was patient when she was irritable with pain. He was gentle when helping her dress or bathe. He anticipated her needs before she voiced them, learning the rhythms of her discomfort and adapting to meet them. You're good at this, Eliza observed one afternoon as he adjusted her pillows for the 3rd time in an hour without complaint. At what? Caring for someone. Being tender. Rowan's hand stilled. My mother was sick for months before she died. I learned. He settled beside her on the bed, careful not to jostle her injured shoulder. I'm just grateful I get to use those skills for healing instead of watching someone slip away. Tell me about the ranch, Eliza said, changing the subject because the grief in his voice was too raw. What's been happening while I've been trapped in this bed? His face brightened slightly. The neighbors have been incredible. Remember how they helped after Margaret's death? This is 10 times that. The Michelsons sent over 3 hands to help with repairs. The Brewsters donated lumber. Even old man Garrison, who hasn't spoken to me in 5 years over a boundary dispute, rode over with a wagon full of hay to replace what we lost. Why? Because we won. Because we stood up to the mining companies that have been terrorizing small ranchers for years, and we survived. We're heroes, apparently. Rowan's mouth quirked with dry amusement. The territorial newspaper ran a story about the brave rancher and his courageous wife who defended their land against corporate corruption. You're famous. Eliza groaned. I don't want to be famous. I just want to heal and get back to work. Too late. You're the woman who took a bullet for her husband and lived to tell about it. People are going to talk about that for years. His expression sobered. You really did save my life, you know. If you hadn't pushed me when you did, don't. Eliza touched his face with her good hand. We're not going to spend our lives dwelling on what ifs. We're alive. We're together. That's what matters. You're right. Rowan caught her hand and pressed a kiss to her palm. The doctor says if you keep healing at this rate, you'll be back on your feet in another week, and then I have something to show you. What? A surprise. You'll have to wait and see. True to the doctor's prediction, Eliza was up and moving by the end of the following week, though her shoulder still ached and her left arm remained weak. Rowan insisted on helping her down the stairs that first morning, his arm solid and steady around her waist. Close your eyes, he instructed as they reached the front door. Rowan, what? Trust me, just for a minute. Eliza closed her eyes and let him guide her outside. She could hear voices, multiple people, the sounds of construction, hammering and sawing. Okay, Rowan said softly. Open them. Eliza opened her eyes and gasped. The burned hay barn was gone, replaced by a new structure that was already half built, larger than the original, with a stone foundation and beautiful timber framing. That wasn't what made her breath catch. Surrounding the construction site were dozens of people, neighbors, ranch hands, townspeople, all working together, raising the new barn with their combined strength. "They've been coming every day for a week," Rowan said, his voice thick with emotion. "Everyone who couldn't help during the attack, everyone who wanted to show support, they're building it for us, for free, as thanks for standing up to Cantrell." Tears streamed down Eliza's face. "It's beautiful. Come on. There's someone who wants to meet you." He guided her toward a group of women preparing food for the workers. At the center was a tiny woman with steel gray hair and fierce eyes. "Mrs. Hale," the woman said, gripping Eliza's good hand with surprising strength. "I'm Sarah Garrett. My husband owns the ranch 15 miles south. I wanted to thank you personally." "Thank me? For what?" "For being brave enough to fight. The mining companies drove my son off his land 3 years ago, burned him out, and he couldn't afford to rebuild. He lost everything." Sarah's eyes glittered with unshed tears. "But you and your husband fought back. You won, and now those bastards are going to pay for what they've done. You gave people hope, Mrs. Hale. You showed us we don't have to roll over and accept being bullied." Eliza didn't know what to say. She'd just been protecting her home, her husband. She hadn't meant to become a symbol. But looking at the barn rising from the ashes, at the community that had rallied around them, she understood. Their fight hadn't just been about one ranch. It had been about standing up to corruption, about refusing to let the powerful crush the powerless. And somehow, impossibly, they'd won. The summer passed in a haze of healing and rebuilding. The barn was completed by August, a structure more beautiful and functional than the original. The ranch prospered under Rowan and Eliza's joint management. Her organizational skills, combined with his deep knowledge of ranching, created an operation that was both efficient and profitable. But more important than the physical rebuilding was the healing that happened between them. The walls that had separated Rowan from the world came down completely. He laughed again, genuine, full-throated laughter that transformed his face and made Eliza's heart soar. He joked with the hands, danced with his wife in the kitchen when no one was watching, allowed himself to be happy without the crushing weight of guilt. And he talked about Samuel without the old pain, sharing happy memories instead of dwelling on the loss. One evening in late September, as they sat on the porch watching the sun set over the mountains, he told Eliza about Samuel's last letter. "It arrived 2 weeks after he died," Rowan said quietly. He'd written it the night before the card game, said he knew he was taking stupid risks, gambling with men he shouldn't trust. But he also said, his voice caught. He said he loved me, that he was grateful for everything I'd done for him, that he wanted me to be happy. "He would have liked me, I think," Eliza said, lacing her fingers through Rowan's. "He would have loved you. Samuel always had good taste in people." Rowan squeezed her hand. "I spent 5 years hating myself for not protecting him, for not being there when he needed me. But you taught me something important, that the best way to honor the people we've lost is to live well, to be happy, to build something beautiful from the ashes. Is that what we're doing?" Every day. October brought the first snow and a discovery that changed everything. Eliza had been feeling unwell for weeks, nausea in the mornings, exhaustion that hit her like a wave mid-afternoon, a strange sensitivity to smells. She'd attributed it to lingering effects from her injury, but when Martha Michelson came to visit and took one look at her, the older woman had smiled knowingly. "How far along are you, dear?" Eliza had stared at her blankly. "How far along with what?" "Your pregnancy, child. You're glowing with it." The words hit Eliza like a thunderbolt. Pregnant. She and Rowan had been careful about nothing, their nights together passionate and frequent, but somehow she hadn't connected the symptoms. Now, with Martha's words, everything clicked into place. "I think I might be," Eliza breathed. "I hadn't considered about 3 months, I'd say." "You'll start showing soon," Martha beamed. "Congratulations, Mrs. Hale. Your mother-in-law would have been over the moon." Telling Rowan was the hardest thing Eliza had ever done, not because she feared his reaction, but because she didn't know how to put the enormity of it into words. She waited until they were alone that evening, curled together in their bed, his arms around her in the familiar embrace that had become her favorite place in the world. I have something to tell you, she said quietly. Rowan immediately tensed. Are you feeling worse? Is your shoulder? I'm pregnant. Absolute silence. Rowan went completely still, his breathing stopped, his heart seeming to pause beneath her ear where it rested against his chest. Then he pulled back to look at her face, his eyes wide with wonder and disbelief. You're sure? Martha said about 3 months. I've had all the signs, I just didn't realize. She didn't get to finish the sentence because Rowan was kissing her, deep and thorough and filled with so much joy it made her dizzy. When he finally pulled back, his eyes were bright with tears. A baby, he whispered. We're going to have a baby. Are you happy? Eliza asked, suddenly uncertain. I know we haven't talked about children, and with everything that's happened… Happy? Rowan laughed, the sound breaking slightly. Eliza, I'm terrified and thrilled and grateful and more in love with you than I thought possible. A baby, our baby, a new beginning. He placed his hand carefully on her still flat stomach, his touch reverent. If it's a girl, Eliza said softly, I'd like to name her Margaret, if that's okay with you. Rowan's face crumpled. He pressed his forehead to hers, tears sliding down his cheeks. Ma would have loved that. She would have loved you, loved this baby. She'd be so proud. She knew, Eliza said with sudden certainty. At the end, when she said I loved you even if I didn't know it yet, she knew this was coming. All of it. She brought us together knowing we'd build something beautiful. She was a meddling, manipulative, wonderful woman, Rowan agreed, his voice thick. And I'm grateful every day that she refused to let me bury myself alive. They held each other as the snow fell outside. Two people who'd found love in the most unlikely circumstances, building a future neither had dared dream of months before. Winter settled over Ironwood Ridge like a benediction. The new barn stood strong against the storms. The cattle weathered the cold in good health. And inside the house, Rowan and Eliza prepared for the arrival of their child. Rowan became almost comically protective, refusing to let Eliza lift anything heavier than a teacup, hovering whenever she moved too quickly, reading every book about childbirth he could get his hands on. Eliza bore his fussing with good humor, understanding that beneath the protectiveness was fear of loss, of something going wrong, of happiness being snatched away as it had been before. I'm not fragile, she told him one evening as he tried to prevent her from climbing the stairs alone. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. I'll be fine. I know, but humor me anyway. Always. Margaret Hale was born on a brilliant April morning, arriving with the spring flowers and filling the house with her lusty cries. The labor was long and difficult, testing Eliza's strength to its limits. But when the midwife finally placed the tiny squalling bundle in her arms, every moment of pain was forgotten. She's perfect, Eliza breathed, touching the baby's impossibly small fingers, her downy dark hair. Look at her, Rowan. We made this. Rowan stood beside the bed, tears streaming openly down his scarred face as he looked at his wife and daughter. She has your determination, already screaming her demands at the world. And your stubborn chin. We're in trouble when she's older. Probably. Rowan carefully took the baby, cradling her with a tenderness that made Eliza's heart overflow. Hello, little Margaret. I'm your father. I promise to protect you and love you and embarrass you terribly when you're old enough to bring boys around. The baby stopped crying, her unfocused eyes seeming to study Rowan's face. Then she yawned, utterly unimpressed with the drama of her arrival, and fell asleep in her father's arms. She's going to rule us completely, Eliza observed. I'm counting on it. The years that followed were marked by growth and joy. The ranch prospered, expanding to include additional grazing land and a contract to supply beef to the army posts scattered throughout the territory. Eliza's management skills became legendary. Ranchers from across Montana sought her advice on accounting and organization. Rowan's reputation as a fair and honest man drew the best hands in the territory to work at Ironwood Ridge. But the greatest growth happened in the quiet moments. Watching Margaret take her first steps, teaching her to ride on a gentle pony, sitting together on the porch as the sun set over the mountains. Rowan and Eliza built a life rich with love and laughter, a home where grief no longer held dominion. 5 years after Margaret's birth, a son arrived, Samuel, named for the uncle who would have loved him. then another daughter, Elizabeth, and finally, a surprise baby boy they named Thomas for Rowan's father. The house that had once been so quiet and frozen now rang with children's laughter and the chaos of family life. And through it all, Rowan and Eliza stood together, partners in every sense of the word. On their 10th anniversary, Rowan took Eliza to the hillside where his parents and brother were buried. They stood in the late summer sunshine, holding hands, watching their children play in the wildflowers that covered the graves. "Do you ever regret it?" Rowan asked quietly. "Leaving Boston? Coming here to marry a stranger?" Eliza looked at him. This man who'd been cold and distant and broken when they met. Who'd learned to love again, to laugh again, to live again. Then she looked at their children, at the ranch spread across the valley below, at the life they'd built from nothing. "Not for a single moment," she said. Us, it's everything I never knew I was looking for. You saved me, Rowan, from invisibility, from loneliness, from a life that was just survival. You made me matter. You always mattered. I just helped you see it." Rowan pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her temple. "I was the one who needed saving. You brought me back from the dead, Eliza. You showed me that it was possible to love again, to trust again, to believe in tomorrow." "We saved each other then." "Yeah, we did." They stood on that hillside as the sun began its descent, surrounded by wildflowers and memory and hope. Margaret called out, asking if she could pick flowers to bring home. Samuel was trying to climb a tree he had no business climbing. The babies, who weren't really babies anymore, were tumbling through the grass like puppies. It was messy and imperfect and absolutely beautiful. Eliza thought about the woman she'd been when she stepped off that train in Ironwood, plain, scared, convinced she was settling for a lifetime of loneliness in exchange for basic survival. She could hardly recognize that woman now, because she hadn't just survived, she'd thrived. She'd found love in the last place she expected it, with a man who'd needed her as much as she needed him. Together, they'd weathered loss and violence and grief. They'd built something stronger than either of them could have created alone. The ranch that had been Rowan's lonely fortress became a home filled with laughter and love. The man who'd sealed himself behind walls of ice became a father who read bedtime stories and taught his children to ride and loved his wife with a fierce devotion that grew stronger every year. And the invisible woman from Boston became the heart of a family, a ranch, a legacy. "Come on," Rowan said, calling to the children. "Time to head home." Home. The word resonated through Eliza like a bell, pure and true. They walked down the hillside together as the sun painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson, their children running ahead, their hands clasped tight. Behind them, the wildflowers swayed in the evening breeze, and if Eliza closed her eyes, she could almost hear Margaret's voice on the wind, satisfied and proud. She'd brought them together, this stubborn old woman who'd refused to let her son die alongside her. She'd given them both a chance at happiness, at love, at life. And they'd taken that chance and transformed it into something beautiful, something eternal, something worth fighting for, bleeding for, living for. Together, all the way, just as they'd promised.